You open your own door into a morning that has forgotten how to be bright. The fog is so thick that the other cottages around the green have become mere suggestions of themselves, darker patches of grey against a lighter grey world. The air clings to your cheeks with a cool, wet touch, heavy with the smell of damp earth and old thatch. You pull your wool cloak close around your shoulders, feel its familiar weight settle across your back, and step forward into the muffled quiet. Your shoes press into the grass of the village green, bending the wet blades with a soft, hushed sound that the fog swallows almost before it can travel. There is no wind, no bird call, no distant lowing of cattle. Only the steady whisper of your own breath and the faint creak of your leather soles as you walk. The green feels larger in the fog, its edges dissolved into shapeless veils of mist that shift slowly but never part. You know the path well, of course. You have walked it hundreds of times, in darkness and in daylight, in rain and in frost. Yet today your feet find their way more by memory than by sight, following the slight dip in the ground worn by countless footsteps over centuries. You step around a puddle that you hear more than see, the water's surface giving a tiny liquid click as a droplet falls from a bent stem somewhere inside the mist. Gradually, as you cross the green, a darker mass begins to take form ahead. It is the church, though the fog has stolen its sharp edges and made it into a soft hunched shape like a great sleeping animal folded upon the earth. The tower rises out of this mass, but its upper reaches are entirely hidden. You can only guess at where stone becomes sky. The fog thickens near the building, pooling in the low corners where the ground slopes toward the old drainage ditch that runs along the south side. Your feet find the flagstone path that leads to the porch, each slab set slightly unevenly so that your stride changes rhythm as you go, a gentle rocking motion that makes the journey feel like a slow lullaby for the body. The south door of the church stands before you, its heavy oak timbers dark with the moisture drawn from the air over many damp seasons. The iron hinges are black and patterned with a thin crust of rust that flakes only slightly under close inspection, and the handle is a simple ring of the same cold iron, hanging from a circular back plate that has been polished only by the touch of hands. You pause there, letting your own breathing settle into the deep quiet. The fog drifts against your face like a slow, cold tide, and you feel tiny beads of moisture gathering on your eyelashes and in the wool of your hood. You reach out and place your palm on the iron ring. The metal is so cold that it seems to pull the warmth directly from your skin, a sharp but not unpleasant sensation that travels up your wrist and fades somewhere in your forearm. You curl your fingers around the ring and feel the slight gritty texture of aged iron, the way it has been shaped by a smith long ago, the hammer marks still faintly visible under your fingertips. You push the door. It opens slowly, with a low groan that is not loud but deep, a sound that seems to rise from the earth itself and spread outward through the stone walls, only to be absorbed instantly by the fog outside. You step from the soft grey light of the morning into the darker grey of the church interior, pulling the door closed behind you. The sound of its closing is a hollow thud that echoes once, twice, then fades into the silence like a stone dropped into deep water. You stand still just inside the threshold, letting your eyes begin the slow work of adjusting to the dimness. The church smells of old stone, of beeswax from the stubby candles that burn on the altar far to the east, of damp wool perhaps left behind in a forgotten corner after Sunday Mass. There is also the faintest hint of incense, a memory of the last feast day, and underneath everything the cool mineral breath of the very earth that holds the foundations. The air inside is still, so still that you can hear the soft settling of your own tunic as you lower your arm from the door handle. The great nave stretches ahead into shadow, its long rows of wooden pews barely visible as darker lines in the gloom. Above you, the wooden roof beams fade into a darkness that no candle can reach at this hour. The only light comes from a single oil lamp suspended near the chancel, a tiny amber point that trembles gently, as if breathing in time with the building itself. You begin to walk toward the west end of the nave, where the tower arch waits. Your footsteps make a soft, rhythmic scuff on the stone flags of the aisle, a sound that is part shoe leather, part grit, and part the faint echo that the church returns to you with a whisper of delay. The aisle stones are worn into shallow, polished dips where centuries of feet have passed, and you feel the smoothness through your soles as a slight shift in pressure, a subtle map that your body reads without thought. You pass the font, a squat stone basin on a pedestal carved with simple leaf patterns, its surface wet with condensation that gathers in the grooves and makes the leaves glisten dully. You slow your pace out of habit, not urgency, because there is no hurry at all, only the measured progress of a morning task that has been done in this way for longer than anyone remembers. The tower arch rises before you, a wide pointed opening framed by massive stone blocks that bear the chisel marks of the masons who set them in place long ago. The arch itself is slightly asymmetrical, as if the earth settled a little after construction, giving it a subtle lean that only someone who looks carefully would ever notice. A low wooden door, a wicket gate set into the archway, stands closed and waiting. You pause once more to listen. The silence here is different from the silence outside. It is not the muffled absence of the fog, but the deep, layered quiet of an ancient place that has absorbed centuries of prayer and song and tolling bells into its stones, a silence that feels inhabited rather than empty. You rest your hand on the rough surface of the arch's stone, feeling the cool grit that rubs off slightly under your touch, leaving a faint white dust on your fingertips. The wooden door of the tower base has a simple iron latch, a straight bar that lifts and falls into a hook of its own weight. You lift it with a forefinger, feeling the cold iron slide against the metal catch, and the door swings inward with a slight creak that is higher pitched than the great south door, a sound like the soft call of a sleepy bird. Beyond it, the darkness of the tower's lowest chamber waits, smelling of dust and old rope and the faint tang of metal from the clock weights somewhere above. You step through and let the latch fall back into place with a small final click that echoes upward into the spiral stair. You are now at the very beginning of the climb, standing on the ground floor of the tower where a few spare candles, a broom of bound twigs, and a wooden box of sand for the floor are tucked into a niche. The first step of the spiral staircase is just ahead, a wedge-shaped block of limestone worn into a hollow that matches the shape of a right foot. Your right foot, as it happens. You set your soul into that familiar curve, feeling how it cups the ball of your foot and guides the heel toward the center newel. Your hand finds the newel post, a pillar of stone that rises like the trunk of an ancient tree, polished to a dark sheen by countless palms over the ages. The surface is cool, but not as cold as the iron outside, a steady temperature that seems to belong entirely to the tower's own body. From here, you could look up, but the staircase coils so tightly that you can see only a few steps ahead before the curve wraps around the central pillar and hides the rest. The stone walls on the outer side are damp to the touch, beaded with moisture that has seeped through the porous limestone during the foggy night. It is this moisture that gives the tower its particular smell, a scent like wet stone after rain, but older, as if the rain had been falling for a very long time indeed. You lift your left hand and place it on the outer wall, feeling the rough tooling of the stone, the little pits and ridges left by the mason's chisel. Your body now bridges the stairway, one hand on the newel, one on the wall, and you begin the ascent with a steady, unhurried rhythm. The first turn of the stair takes you away from the small light of the tower base and into near darkness. But your eyes have grown accustomed enough that you can still discern the difference between the solid black of the stone and the slightly lighter grey of the arrow slits that appear every few steps. At the first slit you pause and look out, though there is nothing to see but a moving wall of fog, so dense it seems you could reach out and gather it in handfuls like carded wool. The fog presses against the slit with an almost physical presence, and a tiny current of cool air spills over the stone ledge and touches your cheek. You linger there, feeling the chill spread across your skin, and you notice that the stone ledge has a small groove worn into it, possibly from the elbows of other watchers who stood in this very spot over the long years, looking out for the dawn or for the return of someone dear. You move on. The steps continue to rise, each one a little taller than a normal stair, built for a time when legs were accustomed to climbing. Your breathing deepens slowly, a quiet rhythm that matches the soft scuff of your soles and the whisper of your palm against the newel. The turn of the stair is so regular that it becomes almost like a chant, a body rhythm that encourages the mind to empty itself of everything except the sensation of rising, the coolness of the air, the faint distant drip of condensation that echoes up from the base of the tower, or perhaps from somewhere deep in the walls. At the second arrow slit you pause again, this time because the stone on the sill has a small depression that holds a shallow pool of fog water. You dip your fingertip into it, feel the shocking coldness of the tiny pool, and then wipe your finger dry on the wool of your sleeve. The fog outside is just as thick, perhaps even thicker, and the light that struggles through it is a soft, pearl-grey glow that makes the slit look like a panel of polished pewter set into the wall. There is no sound at all from the world beyond, not even the drip of water from the eaves. The fog has wrapped the village in a silence so complete that you feel as if you are the only person awake in the entire valley. You climb higher. The newel post under your hand grows slightly slimmer as you rise, tapering in a way that your palm notices even if your eyes would not. The stone is smooth here, almost slick, and you feel the slight ridge of a mortar joint pass under your fingers every few steps, a tiny irregularity that marks the work of a different mason or a different day. The outer wall, too, changes its texture, from rough chisel work to a smoother finish where a later repair was made, the stone a slightly paler grey than the original blocks. You pass a third slit, and here the fog has begun to thin just a little, as if you have climbed high enough to find the edge of the cloud. Through the opening you see a faint smudge of darker grey that might be the roof of a cottage, or perhaps the top of an ancient yew in the churchyard, but you cannot be certain, and you do not strain to know. Your legs have settled into the climb now, the muscles of your thighs and calves working in a slow, steady harmony. There is a comfort in this physical repetition, a feeling of purpose without urgency that allows the mind to wander gently, touching on nothing in particular, just drifting like the fog outside. You think of the rope you will soon touch, the great bell waiting silently above, but these thoughts are soft and distant, without any edge of expectation. They rise and fall with your steps, one thought per step, and then they are gone. At the fourth slit, the fog has lifted enough that you can see a patch of green below. The village green, perhaps, though it looks impossibly far away, a small oval of darker color surrounded by grey. The sight is dreamlike, as if you are looking down into water, and you feel a gentle wave of vertigo that passes almost as soon as it comes. You tighten your grip on the newel for a moment, feel the solid stone reassure your body, and then you continue upward. The air grows slightly cooler as you climb, and you notice that your breath now makes a faint mist in front of your lips, a tiny fog of your own that mingles with the tower's chill. You welcome the cold. It keeps your senses alert but calm, a pleasant sharpness that contrasts with the heavy warmth of your wool cloak. You pause once more this time, not at a slit but simply on a step, and you listen. The tower is so quiet that you can hear a faint, high-pitched sound, something like the distant ring of a very small bell, but it is only the blood moving in your ears, the sound of your own body doing its quiet work. You climb on. The number of steps has long since faded from your conscious count, replaced by a simple sense of progress, a feeling that the top is still a way off, but that this does not matter at all. The spiral seems endless in the most reassuring way, a path that asks nothing of you except that you continue. Your hand slides from newel to wall and back again as the stair shifts its geometry slightly at a landing that you do not take, a small wooden door that leads to a storage loft you have no need to visit today. The wood of that door is grey and split with age, its iron strap hinges spotted with rust, and as you pass it you catch the faint scent of old straw, perhaps from a forgotten bird's nest or a bundle of rushes stored there long ago. The steps now become slightly narrower, your shoulders brushing the outer wall more frequently. The newel is closer to your body, and you can feel the warmth of your own hand gradually seeping into the stone, a tiny exchange of heat that makes the surface feel less cold under your palm. The arrow slits appear less often here, and when they do they are smaller, mere loopholes that admit only the faintest breath of the outside world. The fog at this height is thinning into a pale mist, and through one slit you glimpse a patch of sky that is the color of a dove's breast, soft and uniform. Finally, after what feels like a very long time but is in truth only a few minutes more, you see a change in the darkness ahead. A faint, warmer light begins to grow, a glow that flickers slightly, and you know you are nearing the intermediate chamber where the bell ropes hang. The air here carries a faint smell of hemp and beeswax, and you can hear, very faintly, the slow tick of the clock mechanism from the room above. You pause on the last step before the platform, your hand still on the newel, and you breathe in the familiar scents, letting the quiet settle around you like a second cloak. The climb is almost done, but for now you rest in the gentle darkness, a figure suspended between the earth below and the bells above, perfectly still in the heart of the fog-bound tower. You step off the last stair and onto the small wooden platform of the intermediate chamber, feeling the planks give slightly under your weight with a soft, muted creak that seems to belong more to the wood than to the air around it. The platform is not large, perhaps 8 feet across in any direction, its boards worn smooth by the passage of many feet over many years, their edges slightly rounded and their surfaces polished to a dull sheen that catches the faint candlelight. The chamber sits about halfway up the tower, a pause in the long spiral that connects the earth below to the bells above, and it has always felt to you like a place of waiting, a room made for the in-between moments when one journey has ended and another has not quite begun. The first thing you notice, as always, is the smell of hemp. It is a dry, fibrous scent that fills the chamber with a quiet earthiness, like the smell of old rope stored in a barn loft, but cleaner and somehow more purposeful. The bell ropes hang down through round holes cut into the ceiling planks, 5 of them in a rough circle around the central pillar, and their lower ends are coiled neatly on a row of wooden pegs set into the wall. Each coil is slightly different, reflecting the thickness and stiffness of its rope, the way it has been handled and pulled and allowed to rest over the long years. Some coils lie flat and obedient, while others have a slight springiness to them, a memory of tension that makes them push gently outward against their pegs. You step closer to the peg rail, and the scent of the hemp grows stronger, mingling now with the faintest trace of beeswax from the candle that burns on its iron bracket. The candle is a stub, perhaps 2 inches tall, its flame a steady amber teardrop that barely trembles in the still air of the chamber. The bracket is a simple piece of black iron, hammered into a curl that holds the candle at a slight outward angle so that the melting wax drips away from the wall and collects in a small tin dish set below. The dish is nearly full with old wax, a pale pool of solidified drippings that record the passage of many candles before this one, each burnt down to its final hours in this quiet room. The light from the flame is small but warm, and it casts a trembling circle of amber that reaches just far enough to touch the nearest rope coils, the edge of the newel post, and the first few steps of the stair that continues upward into darkness. Beyond this circle, the chamber fades into soft shadow, its corners lost in a gentle gloom that feels less like absence of light and more like a thickening of the air itself. You walk slowly across the platform, your footsteps making a low, hollow sound that echoes slightly in the wooden floor, and then fades into the stone walls beyond. The planks have small gaps between them, and through these gaps you catch a glimpse of the darkness below, the long drop down the tower's hollow core where the ropes travel on their way to the bells. It is a strange thing to stand on a floor that feels solid under your feet, and yet to know that a great open space hangs just beneath the boards, a vertical shaft of darkness that runs the full height of the tower. But the feeling is not frightening, only slightly solemn, as if you are standing on a threshold between the small world of the chamber and the larger world of the bells above. You stop at the central pillar, where the newel post continues upward through the platform, its stone surface still cool and smooth under your palm. The post here is slightly thicker than it was on the stairs below, and you can feel the subtle change in diameter as you run your hand around its curve, a gentle taper that the mason designed with care. Around the base of the pillar, where it passes through the wooden floor, someone long ago fitted a collar of lead, a soft grey ring that seals the gap and keeps the dust from sifting down into the lower chambers. The lead is dented in places, marked by the accidental strikes of feet or falling objects, and you touch one of these dents with your fingertip, feeling its shallow depression and the slightly greasy texture of the aged metal. The bell ropes draw your attention now, as they always do when you stand in this chamber. They are the reason for your climb, the connection between your hands and the great bronze voices that hang in the darkness above, and you approach them with the same quiet respect that a scribe might give to a book of hours. The first rope you touch is the one for the smallest bell, a slender hemp cord no thicker than your thumb, its surface soft with age and use. You lift it gently from its peg, feeling how lightly it rests in your palm, and you follow the sally upward with your eyes. The sally is the woolen grip woven into the rope about 6 feet from the end, a section where the hemp has been wrapped with colored wool to give a better hold for the hands. This sally is faded red, the color of old wine, and its wool is slightly napped from countless grips, the fibers standing up in tiny soft ridges that catch the candlelight. You run your palm over the sally, feeling its warmth relative to the cold hemp, and then you let the rope rest back on its peg. The second rope is thicker, a full hand's width around, and its weight is greater when you lift it from the peg. This is the rope for the middle bell, the one that rings the quarter hours, and its sally is a deep blue that has faded over the years to something closer to the color of a winter sky at dusk. The wool here is more worn, with a patch near the top where the threads have been pressed flat by the repeated grip of the same hand, perhaps your own hand, though you cannot be certain. You hold the sally for a moment, feeling its familiar thickness against your palm, and you notice a slight greasiness that comes from the natural oils of skin, a reminder that you were not the first to hold this rope, and will not be the last. The hemp above the sally is slightly frayed where the rope passes through the ceiling hole, and you make a mental note to check that spot more carefully on a future visit, though it is not urgent and you feel no hurry to attend to it. The third rope is the largest of all, a massive hemp cable as thick as a strong man's wrist, its weight so great that you must use both hands to lift it from its peg. This is the great bell's rope, the one that calls the hours and rings for services and tolls for the passing of souls. Its sally is a dark green, almost black in the candlelight, and the wool has been replaced so many times that the original color can only be guessed at from the oldest, innermost layers of the wrapping. You hold this rope with care, feeling the rough hemp bite gently into your palms, and you let your eyes travel upward along its length to where it disappears through the ceiling hole. The hole is larger than the others, lined with a wooden collar that has been rubbed smooth by the rope's movement, and the hemp above the sally is dark with age and faintly glossy where it has been polished by the ceiling boards. You lower the great rope back onto its peg, and the peg creaks slightly under the weight, a tiny sound that seems very loud in the quiet of the chamber, and then is gone. You stand for a while with your hands resting on the peg rail, feeling the wood warm under your touch. The wood is oak, dark and heavy, its grain raised slightly by years of humidity and the occasional brush of wet wool from passing cloaks. The pegs themselves are simple turned cylinders, each one slightly different from its neighbors, shaped by a craftsman who worked with a foot-powered lathe in a workshop somewhere in the village long ago. Some pegs have small cracks at their ends, little splits that have opened over time as the wood dried and shrank, and you trace one of these cracks with your fingernail, feeling its sharp edge and the smooth polish of the wood beside it. The candle flame shifts slightly, and you glance over to see that the wax pool in the tin dish has risen higher, the melted wax now lapping at the base of the flame. A thin thread of smoke rises from the wick, a grey curl so faint that it is almost invisible, and it carries the sweet, clean scent of burning beeswax into the air. You watch the flame for a long moment, seeing how it dances with a slow, hypnotic rhythm that seems to follow no pattern at all, simply wavering this way and then that in response to currents of air too subtle for your skin to feel. The light catches the edges of the rope coils and makes them glow with a soft amber halo, and for a moment the entire chamber seems suspended in a golden stillness, a place outside of time where nothing moves and nothing needs to move. Then, very faintly, you hear a sound from above. It is the clock mechanism, the slow, regular tick of the escapement wheel as it turns in the cockroom one floor higher. The sound drifts down through the ceiling with a muffled, rhythmic quality, like the heartbeat of the tower itself, steady and unhurried and completely indifferent to anything beyond its own turning. You listen to it for several long breaths, letting the rhythm settle into your awareness, and you feel a quiet sense of companionship with the old clock, another presence in the tower that keeps its own vigil through the fog and the darkness and the passing of the hours. The tick does not hurry and it does not slow. It simply marks the time with a calm persistence that asks nothing of you except that you notice it and perhaps that you find comfort in its regularity. You turn back to the ropes and begin your inspection, a ritual you perform each time you climb the tower. It is not a task that requires great attention, more a series of gentle touches and quiet observations that your hands know how to do almost without your mind's involvement. You check each rope where it passes through the ceiling, feeling the hemp for any signs of excessive wear, running your fingers along the strands and noting their texture and tension. The hemp is rough but not brittle, with a slight springiness that tells you the fibers are still strong. A little dust sifts down as you touch the ropes, fine particles that drift in the candlelight and settle on your sleeves with a soft, pale patina that you will brush off later without thinking. At the spot where the great rope bends over its pulley above, you feel a slight flattening of the strands, a natural compression that comes from the weight of the bell resting against the wheel. It is nothing to worry about, just the normal settling of hemp under tension, and you smooth the strands back into place with a gentle stroking motion that leaves the rope looking slightly neater. The other ropes show similar signs of use, small adjustments that you make without urgency, one after another, your hands moving through the familiar motions with the ease of long practice. The wool sallies you check too, feeling their nap and noting the places where the wrapping has begun to loosen. On the blue sally you find a loose thread and tuck it back under its neighbor with a careful fingertip, a tiny repair that will hold for many more wringings before it needs proper attention. The inspection complete, you return to the peg rail and let your hands rest there once more. The candle has burnt down a little further, the flame now slightly shorter and more blue at its base, and the wax pool has deepened so that the light must struggle through a thicker layer of liquid wax before reaching the air. You know that you should continue upwards soon, but there is no hurry at all, and the chamber is so peaceful that you allow yourself a few more minutes of stillness. The fog outside has pressed itself against the arrow slit you passed on the stair, and a tiny curl of mist has found its way into the chamber, a pale tendril that drifts across the floorboards and dissolves near the candle bracket as if it cannot bear the warmth. You watch it disappear and feel the cool touch of the mist on your ankles, a fleeting sensation that is gone almost before you register it. From somewhere very far away, perhaps from the village green or from one of the cottages beyond, You hear a sound that might be a cockerel crowing, but the fog has muffled it so completely that it reaches you only as a faint, ghostly call, more of a suggestion than a true sound. You tilt your head and listen, but the call does not come again, and the silence settles back over the tower like a blanket being drawn up over a sleeping body. The tick of the clock continues, and the candle flame continues its slow dance, and you stand there in the middle of it all, a part of the tower's quiet life, neither waiting nor acting, simply being. Eventually you push yourself away from the peg rail with a gentle movement that makes the boards creak once, and you walk toward the stair that leads upward to the clock room. The steps here are slightly steeper than the ones below, and the newel post narrows again as you place your hand on it, feeling the familiar coolness and the smooth polish that seems to welcome your palm. You pause on the first step and look back at the chamber, seeing the ropes hanging in their quiet circle, the candle still burning on its bracket, the tin dish nearly full of wax, and the faint curl of mist still drifting along the floor. Then you turn and begin the next stage of the climb, your body settling into the steady rhythm once more, your breathing deepening as the air grows cooler and the darkness closes in around you with a soft, comforting presence that has no edges and asks no questions. The steps rise in their slow spiral, and you count them in a whisper, not because you need to know the number, but because the counting is a kind of meditation, a way to let the mind rest while the body does its work. 1, 2, 3, and your hand slides along the newel. 4, 5, 6, and the outer wall brushes your shoulder. 7, 8, 9, and the arrow slit on your right shows a pale grey rectangle of fog that has begun to thin at last, revealing a hint of the sky beyond. You pause at this slit and look out, seeing the world below transformed into a soft, silver landscape where the roofs of the village emerge from the mist like the backs of whales breaking the surface of a calm sea. The view is beautiful in a quiet, distant way, but you do not linger, because the clockroom is waiting and the bells above it, and your day has a gentle shape that you are content to follow. You climb on, and the stairs carry you upward into the deeper quiet of the tower's upper reaches, where the fog is only a memory, and the air smells of old iron and the slow, patient turning of gears. Your hand finds the next step, and the next, and the climb continues. You continue upward from the rope chamber, leaving its small amber glow behind, and the stairs almost immediately begin to tighten around you. The change is gradual at first, a subtle narrowing of the outer wall that you notice not with your eyes, but with your shoulders, which now brush the stone more frequently as you climb. The newel post under your palm feels slightly slimmer, and the steps themselves seem shorter from front to back, so that your feet must angle inward a little more to find their purchase on the worn hollows. You accept these small adjustments without thought, your body adapting to the tower's changing shape as easily as water adapts to the curve of a channel. The darkness here is deeper than it was below, because the arrow slits are spaced farther apart, and the candle from the chamber is now only a memory of warmth somewhere beneath your feet. Your eyes work to find the difference between the solid black of the stone and the slightly less black rectangles of the slits, and after a while they succeed, so that you can make out the edges of each opening as a faint grey outline against the deeper dark. The air too has changed, carrying a sharper coolness that seems to seep from the walls themselves, and when you breathe you feel the chill reach down into your chest and spread outward through your ribs with a slow, pleasant clarity. You climb 10 steps, 12, 15, and your hand traces the familiar curve with a newel as it spirals upward without end. The stone here is slightly rougher than it was below, the mason's chisel having left deeper marks in the limestone, and your fingers read these marks like a quiet language, feeling the ridges and valleys that tell of a different craftsman or perhaps a different century. The outer wall, too, speaks to your other hand in a similar way, its surface pitted with tiny holes where softer inclusions in the stone have weathered away over the years, leaving a texture like old bread or pumice. You pause once to press your palm flat against this roughness and feel the cool grit that transfers to your skin, a fine pale dust that you later rub absent-mindedly between your thumb and forefinger. The first arrow slit in this section appears on your left, a tall narrow opening that begins at about the height of your knee and extends upward past your head. You stop your climb and turn toward it, resting your shoulder against the slanted inner sill. The fog outside presses against the slit with a quiet insistence, as if it would like to enter but cannot quite make up its mind. A curl of mist spills over the stone ledge and drifts into the stairwell, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and the faint, clean scent of water that has been suspended in cloud for a long time before finally condensing on the ancient stone. You lift your hand and touch the ledge, finding it damp and gritty under your fingertips, the stone cold enough that it feels almost wet, even where the fog has not settled. Through the slit, you can see nothing at all, only a uniform grey-white presence that seems to glow faintly with its own diffuse light. It is the fog at its thickest, the same fog that wrapped the village green and the church porch and the lower windows of the tower, and here at this height it has become a solid-seeming wall of vapour that erases all colour and distance. You could reach your hand through the opening and into that grey nothingness, but you do not, choosing instead to simply watch it drift and curl with the slow movements of a sleeping sea. The fog does not hurry, it has no place to be and no time by which to measure its journey, and its pace invites your own thoughts to slow to match it. You remain at the slit for a long while, feeling the cool mist settle on your cheeks and forehead in tiny droplets that gather and then run slowly down your skin. The sensation is not unpleasant, just a gentle coolness that reminds you of the world outside the tower, the world of open sky and distant hills that you cannot see but know to be there nonetheless. Your breathing steadies and deepens, and you notice that the sound of your own breath has become part of the tower's quiet music, a soft rhythm that joins the faint drip of condensation from somewhere below and the scuff of your own feet when you eventually decide to move again. The stairs continue to rise, and you find that the space has grown so narrow now that you can touch both walls at once without fully extending your arms. The outer wall on your right is cold and damp, the inner newel on your left is cool and dry, and your body moves between them like a shuttle passing through a loom, weaving a slow pattern of ascent. The steps are higher here as well, each riser demanding a little more lift from your knees, and you find yourself placing your full foot onto each tread with a deliberate care that feels almost ceremonial. Your breathing deepens further, though not from exertion so much as from the natural rhythm of the climb, a rhythm that has become as steady as the ticking of the clock somewhere above you, which you can now hear more clearly with each turn of the stair. The second arrow slit is narrower than the first, a mere lancet of an opening that admits a sliver of grey light so thin it looks like a blade of pale silver laid across the stone. The fog here is thinner, or perhaps the wind has shifted it, because you can see a faint suggestion of the sky beyond, a patch of lighter grey that might be the clouds parting, or might be only a thinner band of mist. The stone ledge of this slit is worn into a smooth, shallow groove, where many hands have rested over the centuries, and you place your own palm into that groove as if completing a circuit that began long before you were born. The stone feels cool and faintly greasy from the oils of countless hands, a polish that no tool could replicate and no craftsman could design. You look out through the narrow opening and see, for just a moment, the top of a yew tree emerging from the fog like a dark green island in a sea of white. The branches are heavy with moisture, their tips drooping under the weight of the gathered droplets, and as you watch a single drop falls from one branch to the next, a tiny movement that is swallowed instantly by the mist. The sight is so quiet, so distant, that it feels like something seen in a dream or remembered from a story told long ago, and you do not try to hold on to it, letting it pass through your awareness and fade into the grey as gently as it came. The third slit appears on your right, and this one is wider, almost a small window, with a deep embrasure that angles outward to admit more light. The stone here has been shaped with particular care, the sides of the opening cut at a slant so that the morning sun, when there is morning sun, can reach deeper into the tower's core. Today there is no sun, only the steady grey glow of the fog that fills the embrasure like a panel of polished pewter. You step into the recess and feel the stone surround you on three sides, a small chamber of cold and damp within the larger chamber of the stair. The floor of the recess is worn into a gentle hollow, and you imagine that many bell ringers before you have stood in this exact spot, looking out at the same fog, hearing the same silence. The fog at this height has begun to move a little, stirred by some air current too slow to be called wind, and it flows past the opening in long silent ribbons that curl and twist and occasionally break apart to reveal a patch of deeper grey beyond. You watch the ribbons form and dissolve, each pattern unique and unrepeatable, and the watching becomes a kind of meditation that asks nothing of your mind except that it remain open and still. The cold of the stone seeps through your wool cloak and into your shoulders, but you welcome the sensation, finding in it a crisp clarity that balances the heavy warmth of your body. After a time, you become aware of a sound that is not the drip of water or the scuff of your feet or the tick of the clock. It is a very faint, very high note, almost like the singing of a distant insect, and it seems to come from the fog itself. You hold your breath and listen, and after a moment you realize that it is the wind moving through a gap in the tower's masonry, a tiny fissure somewhere above that catches the drifting air and turns it into a soft whistle. The note wavers slightly as the fog shifts, sometimes rising in pitch, sometimes falling, and then it fades away entirely as the air current changes direction. The silence that follows is deeper than before, a silence so complete that you can hear the soft settling of your own tunic as you shift your weight from one foot to the other. You step back from the slit and continue your climb, your hand finding the newel post once more, and your feet resuming their slow, steady rhythm on the stone treads. The stairs have grown so narrow now that you must turn your body slightly sideways to pass between the walls, and your shoulders brush the outer stone with every step, leaving a faint trail of wool fibers that you will never see and that no one will ever notice. The darkness has become absolute again, the slits appearing less frequently as you approach the level of the clockroom, and you navigate more by touch than by sight, reading the stone with your fingers and your feet, and even your knees as they gently tap the risers ahead. The newel post under your hand has developed a slight crack, a hairline fissure that runs vertically from one mortar joint to the next, and your fingernail catches in it as you slide your palm upward. You pause to explore the crack more carefully, tracing its length with your fingertip and feeling the sharp edge where the stone has split, perhaps from centuries of frost and thaw, or perhaps from the great weight of the bells above pressing down through the tower's spine. The crack does not seem dangerous, only old and settled, a feature of the stone that has become as much a part of the tower as the stairs themselves. At the next arrow slit, which is so small it is little more than a loophole for archers who have not existed for 300 years, you stop and press your face close to the opening. The fog outside is so near that you could lick it, and its cold vapor touches your lips and your eyelids with a feather-like caress that makes you close your eyes for a moment. The smell is of pure water and cold air, and the distant, faintest hint of wood smoke from the village chimneys far below, a smell that rises through the fog like a memory of warmth. You breathe it in slowly, letting it fill your lungs and then releasing it in a long, quiet exhale that joins the fog and becomes part of it. Your legs have begun to feel the climb now, a gentle warmth that spreads through your thighs and calves with each step upward. It is not fatigue in the ordinary sense, more a pleasant awareness of your own body and its steady, capable work, a feeling of being fully present in the simple act of climbing. You could stop and rest, there is no hurry and no one waiting, but the rhythm of the stair has you in its gentle hold, and you find that you prefer to continue, one step after another, your breathing deep and even, and your mind as quiet as the fog itself. The sound of the clock has grown louder as you approach the level of its room, the steady tick-tock now a distinct presence in the air, and beneath it you can hear the slight creak of the wooden frame and the soft grinding of the gears as they turn against each other. The sound is comforting in its regularity, a reminder that the tower is not dead but alive in its own slow way, keeping its own time regardless of whether anyone is there to hear it. You pause on the step below the clockroom landing and listen to the mechanism for a long moment, feeling the vibration of each tick travel through the stone and into the soles of your feet, a tiny pulse that seems to speak directly to your own heartbeat. The drip of condensation you heard earlier has grown louder now, and you realize that it comes not from below, but from above, somewhere in the bell chamber, where the fog has gathered on the great beams and is now falling in slow, heavy drops onto the floorboards. Each drop strikes with a soft, hollow plink that echoes down through the tower's core, and the interval between drops is so long and irregular that you cannot predict when the next one will come. A small uncertainty that keeps your ears gently alert without any sense of urgency. You take one more step and find yourself on a small landing, a square platform of oak planks that marks the entrance to the clockroom. The door before you is a simple wooden panel with iron strap hinges, and through the gap at its base you can see the faint orange glow of the clockroom's candle, a warm light that spills out onto the landing and touches the toes of your shoes. You stand there for a moment, your hand resting on the iron latch, and you feel the cool metal begin to warm under your touch. The fog has followed you all the way up the narrow stair, curling around your ankles and settling in the folds of your cloak, and now it mingles with the candlelight in a soft haze that makes the landing seem like a threshold between two worlds, the grey world of the mist and the golden world of the clock. But you do not open the door yet. You linger on the landing, listening to the tick and the drip and the far-off whisper of the wind through the arrow slit below, and you allow yourself to be fully present in this moment, suspended between the earth and the bells, wrapped in the quiet music of the tower's deep and patient life. You open the door to the intermediate chamber with a gentle push, the iron latch lifting easily under your thumb, and the familiar space welcomes you with its quiet smell of hemp and beeswax and old, settled dust. The chamber is exactly as you left it in memory, though you have not been here since the last time you climbed these stairs, whenever that was, and the sameness of it brings a small sense of comfort that settles somewhere deep in your chest. The wooden floorboards creak under your weight as you step fully inside, and you let the door swing closed behind you with a soft, hollow sound that echoes once against the stone walls and then fades into the silence. The candle on its iron bracket still burns, its flame now a little shorter and its wax pool a little deeper, but otherwise unchanged. The light it casts is the same warm amber circle you remember, touching the nearest rope coils with a golden glow and leaving the corners of the chamber in a soft, patient shadow that has no sharp edges. The tin dish beneath the candle has collected another small puddle of melted wax, and a thin thread of smoke rises from the wick with a slow, almost imperceptible curl, carrying the sweet scent of beeswax into the still air. You walk toward the bracket and pause beside it, feeling the faint warmth of the flame on your cheek, a tiny point of heat in the general coolness of the tower. The warmth is so slight that you almost cannot feel it, but it is there, a gentle presence that reminds you of the sun on a distant day. The bell ropes hang from the ceiling in their familiar arrangement, 5 of them in a rough circle around the central stone pillar that passes through the chamber on its way upward. Each rope descends through a round hole cut into the wooden ceiling planks, and the holes are lined with wooden collars that have been polished smooth by the constant, patient rubbing of the hemp over many years. You step toward the nearest rope, the one for the smallest bell, and you place your hand on its coiled lower end where it rests on the peg rail. The hemp is cool and slightly rough under your palm, with a texture that is both fibrous and smooth, the strands twisted tightly together into a cord that has held its shape through thousands of pulls and releases. You lift the coil from its peg and feel its weight, light and manageable, the weight of a bell that speaks with a high, clear voice that you will not hear today, but can imagine easily. The sally, the woolen grip woven into the rope, catches your eye as you hold the coil. Its red wool is faded now to the color of dried rose petals, and the fibers are napped and soft from countless grips, standing up in tiny ridges that catch the candlelight. You run your thumb over the sally, feeling its warmth relative to the cold hemp, and you notice a small loose thread near the bottom where the wool has begun to unravel slightly. You tuck the thread back under its neighbor with a careful fingertip, a tiny repair that takes only a moment and leaves the sally looking neat and whole again. The rope above the sally is slightly darker, marked by the oils of hands that have gripped it over the years, and you follow this darker section upward with your eyes until it disappears through the ceiling collar, where the dust has gathered in a thin grey ring around the hole. The second rope is thicker, its hemp strands coarser and more widely spaced, and its weight is greater when you lift it from the peg. This is the rope for the middle bell, the one that rings the quarter hours with a steady, measured note that carries across the village in normal weather, but today would be swallowed by the fog before it traveled 10 yards. The sally on this rope is a deep blue, the color of a winter evening sky, just after the sun has gone, and its wool is more worn than the red one, with a smooth patch near the top where the heel of a hand has pressed against it again and again over the decades. You hold the blue Sally in your palm and feel its thickness, the way it fills your grip without quite stretching your fingers, and you note the slight greasiness that comes from the natural oils of skin, a polish that no craftsman could replicate. The rope above the blue Sally is slightly frayed where it passes through the ceiling, a few loose fibers sticking out at angles, and you smooth them down with a gentle stroke that does not really fix anything but makes the rope look tidier for a little while. The third rope is the largest, the Great Bell's rope, and when you lift it from its peg you must use both hands because the weight is considerable, a solid mass of hemp that pulls downward with a quiet insistence. The Sally on this rope is a dark green, almost black in the candlelight, and its wool has been replaced so many times that the original color can only be guessed at from the oldest, innermost layers of the wrapping. You hold the great Sally and feel its bulk, the way it fills your hands completely, and you imagine the bell above, the largest in the tower, hanging silent and heavy in the fog. The robe above the green Sally is glossy with age, polished by the ceiling collar until it shines faintly in the dim light, and you notice a slight flat spot where the rope bends over its pulley, a natural compression that has been there for as long as you can remember and will remain there for as long as the bell hangs. You spend a long time with the ropes, not because there is anything urgent to do, but because the chamber invites a slow and careful attention, a quiet mindfulness that asks nothing of you except that you be present. You check each rope where it passes through the ceiling, feeling the hemp for any signs of excessive wear, running your fingers along the strands and noting their texture and tension. The fibers are rough but not brittle, with a slight springiness that tells you they are still strong and will hold for many more wringings. A little dust sifts down as you touch the ropes, fine pale particles that drift in the candlelight and settle on your sleeves with a soft, powdery touch, and you brush them off absently with the back of your hand. The peg rail is a long piece of oak set into the wall, dark and heavy with age, its surface worn smooth by the passage of countless hands and the occasional brush of a damp cloak. The pegs themselves are simple turn cylinders, each one slightly different from its neighbors, shaped by a craftsman who worked with a foot-powered lathe in a workshop somewhere in the village long ago. Some pegs have small cracks at their ends, little splits that have opened over time as the wood dried and shrank, and you trace one of these cracks with your fingernail, feeling its sharp edge and the smooth polish of the wood beside it. The pegs are set at a slight upward angle so that the rope coils rest securely against the wall, and you notice that the weight of the great rope has pressed a shallow groove into its peg, a depression that fits the hemp perfectly, as if the wood has learned the shape of its burden. The ceiling of the chamber is low, the wooden planks supported by heavy beams that run across the width of the tower and disappear into the stone walls on either side. The beams are dark with age, their surface is rough with the marks of the adze that shaped them, and in the corners where the beams meet the walls, you can see small drifts of dust that have gathered over the years. Fine grey accumulations that shift slightly when you walk across the floor and set the boards to vibrating. The round holes for the ropes are spaced evenly around the central pillar, each one a perfect circle of darkness above the lighter hemp, and through the holes you can hear, very faintly, the slow tick of the clock mechanism from the room above. You walk a slow circle around the pillar, your hand brushing the newel post as you go, feeling its cool, smooth stone under your palm. The post here is thick and solid, the heart of the tower's spine, and it has been polished to a dark sheen by the touch of hands over centuries. You pause at the far side of the pillar, where the candlelight barely reaches, and you stand in the near darkness for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the tower. The clock ticks above, the ropes creak slightly as they settle, and the fog outside presses against the arrow slits with a silence that is itself a kind of sound, a deep, soft absence that fills the spaces between the other noises. You feel the coolness of the stone through your shoes, the faint vibration of the tower's own stillness, and you let yourself be still within it, a small part of a larger quiet. The candle flame shifts, and you turn to see that a draught has found its way into the chamber, perhaps from the stairwell below, or from a gap in the mortar somewhere above. The flame leans to one side and then straightens, and the light wavers across the ropes and the walls in a slow, gentle dance that makes the shadows move like dark water. You watch the dance for a while, seeing how the light catches the edges of the rope coils and makes them glow, how it touches the iron bracket and makes the metal gleam dully, how it finds the dust motes floating in the air and turns them into tiny points of gold that drift and swirl with no apparent purpose. The movement is hypnotic, and you find your breathing slowing to match it, your inhales and exhales becoming as soft and regular as the tick of the clock above. You return your attention to the ropes and begin a second, even slower inspection, this time checking the wool sallies more carefully. On the red sally, you find a second loose thread, smaller than the first, and you tuck it under its neighbor with the same careful fingertip. On the blue sally, you notice a thin spot where the wool has worn down almost to the hemp beneath, a patch no larger than your thumbnail, and you make a mental note to mention it to the churchwarden when next you see him, though you know it will likely be months before anyone remembers to replace the wrapping. On the green sally, the wool is thick and whole, but you notice a slight shift in the wrapping near the top, a place where the layers have begun to separate from each other, and you press them back together with a firm, gentle pressure that holds for a moment and then slowly relaxes as you release your grip. The great rope draws your attention again, and you spend a particularly long time with it, running your hands along its entire exposed length, from the sally up to the ceiling collar. The hemp is warm in places where your hands have held it, and cool in others where the air has touched it, and the contrast is pleasant under your palms, a map of temperature that tells the story of your presence in the chamber. You find a small knot in one strand, a natural imperfection in the fiber that has been there since the rope was made, and you touch it with your fingertip, feeling its hard, compact shape and the way the other strands bend around it. The knot has caused no trouble and will cause none, just a small variation in the rope's surface that your hands know and expect. You coil the great rope back onto its peg with care, looping it in a figure-8 pattern that keeps the hemp from kinking, and then you do the same with the smaller ropes, one after another, until all 5 coils rest neatly on their pegs in the order you have always arranged them. The task is simple and repetitive, and your mind drifts as your hands work, touching on nothing in particular, just floating like the dust motes in the candlelight. You think about the fog outside and the village below and the bells above, but these thoughts are soft and distant, without any edge of concern or urgency. They come and go like the slow curl of the candle smoke, and you let them go without holding on to any of them. When the ropes are coiled, You stand back and look at the chamber as a whole, seeing it not as a collection of separate objects, but as a single, unified space that has held this arrangement for longer than you have been alive. The peg rail, the candle bracket, the tin dish, the ropes, the pillar, the beams, the dust, the shadows, all of them together form a quiet order that asks nothing of the world except to be left in peace. You feel a deep sense of rightness in this order, a feeling that everything is exactly where it should be, and that your presence here is not an intrusion, but a continuation, another link in a chain of bell ringers that stretches back through the centuries and will stretch forward into a future you cannot imagine. The candle has burnt down a little further, the flame now distinctly shorter and more blue at its base, and you know that you will need to replace it soon. A fresh candle stub sits on a small wooden shelf near the bracket, a spare that you or someone else placed there for just this purpose, and you take it down and hold it in your hand for a moment. The wax is cool and smooth, slightly tacky where it has been handled, and it smells clean and sweet even before it is lit. You set the new candle beside the old one, ready for when the flame finally drowns in its own wax pool. But that moment has not yet arrived, and so you leave the old candle burning and return your attention to the chamber. You walk to the door and pause with your hand on the latch, looking back one last time at the quiet scene. The ropes hang in their patient circle, the candle burns with its steady flame, the dust settles slowly through the still air, and the fog presses against the arrow slit on the stairwell, with a soft grey insistence that you can feel even from here. The chamber will remain exactly as it is until you return, holding its silence and its order and its gentle smell of hemp and beeswax, waiting for no one and needing nothing. You lift the latch and step back out onto the narrow stair, pulling the door closed behind you with a soft click that echoes once and then is gone, and you continue your slow climb upward toward the clock room and the bells that wait beyond it. The stairs beyond the intermediate chamber rise a little more steeply, and you climb them with the same unhurried pace that has carried you this far, your hands sliding along the newel post, and your feet finding the familiar hollows worn into each stone tread. The darkness is thick but no longer absolute, because a faint grey glow has begun to filter down from above, a soft, cool light that grows slightly brighter with each turn of the spiral. You recognize this light as the day's slow brightening, the fog thinning just enough at this height to admit a diffuse illumination that fills the stairwell like water filling a well. After 12 more steps, you reach a small square landing, and before you stands the door to the clock room. It is a low door, shorter than a man's full height, its oak planks darkened with age, and its iron strap hinges spotted with rust that blooms in tiny orange freckles across the dark metal. The latch is a simple iron bar that lifts with the gentle pressure of your thumb, and as you open the door, a warmer breath of air spills out to meet you, carrying a smell that is entirely distinct from the rest of the tower, a smell of old iron and wood that has been slowly impregnated with oil over many decades, along with the faint, clean tang of brass and the dry dust of ages. You step into the clock room and close the door behind you, and the space immediately wraps you in its particular atmosphere. The ceiling here is low, the heavy beams that support the bell chamber floor above, pressing down so that the top of your head comes within a hand's breadth of the ancient oak. The room is not large, perhaps 10 feet square, and it is filled almost entirely by the clock mechanism, a great cage of oak and iron that stands in the center like a piece of furniture built for a giant. The wooden frame rises from the floor planks to the beams above. Its uprights thick as a man's thigh, and its cross members joined with mortise and tenon that have held fast for centuries. The iron components are black with age, their surfaces bearing a fine silvery bloom that is not rust exactly but a softer oxidation, a patina that forms only in places where the air is still and slightly damp and undisturbed for long stretches of time. The first thing that captures your attention is the sound. The escapement wheel turns with a slow, steady tick that is not so much heard as felt, a rhythmic pulse that travels through the floorboards and into the soles of your feet. Each tick is followed by a corresponding tock as the pallets engage and release, and the interval between them is so regular that it seems less like a mechanical action and more like the breathing of the tower itself. You stand just inside the door and let the rhythm wash over you, feeling your own heartbeat gradually align with the slower, steadier beat of the clock. The clock is a thing of remarkable simplicity, despite its apparent complexity, and you have spent enough hours in this room to understand its workings almost as well as you understand your own hands. The great weight stones hang motionless on their ropes, two massive blocks of dressed limestone that descend slowly through a slot in the floor and down into the dark shaft below the tower. One weight drives the going train, the mechanism that turns the hands on the clock face far above, and the other drives the striking train, which will release the hammer that falls against the great bell. Both weights are currently at rest, their ropes wound around wooden drums with iron flanges, and the hemp is dark and glossy where it has been handled during the winding. You walk slowly around the wooden frame, your footsteps muffled by the thick oak planks of the floor, and you observe the gearing with a quiet, careful attention. The great wheel, the largest cog in the going train, turns with a solemn slowness that is almost imperceptible, its iron teeth engaging the smaller pinion of the next wheel in a mesh that has been adjusted and readjusted over centuries until the fit is as precise as the work of any modern craftsman. The teeth are slightly worn, the iron polished to a dull gleam at the points of contact, and a thin film of oil clings to the metal, catching the grey light from the single narrow window and making it glisten faintly. That window is set high in the east wall, a small arched opening that is glazed not with coloured glass, but with thick, uneven panes of greenish crown glass that distort the foggy daylight into shifting patterns of pale silver. The fog outside has found its way into the room through the tiny gaps around the window frame, and a soft, moist presence hangs in the air, enough to make the iron bloom and the wood swell, but not enough to cause any real harm. You touch the windowsill and feel the damp grit of stone, and you notice that the fog has left a fine beading of condensation on the glass, each droplet a tiny lens that catches the light and glows with a soft, diffuse radiance. You turn back to the clock and crouch down to examine the escapement more closely. The escapement wheel is a delicate thing compared to the heavy gears of the going train, its teeth finer and more numerous, and it is here that the steady tick originates, the sound of the pallets alternately catching and releasing the wheel as it turns. The pallets themselves are small blocks of iron set into a vertical shaft that rocks back and forth with each tick, a motion so small and so regular that it seems almost alive. You watch the pallets move for a long time, seeing how they engage the teeth with a soft, precise click, and you feel a quiet admiration for the unknown craftsman who shaped these pieces with such care that they still function perfectly after so many years. The striking train stands beside the going train, its mechanism slightly larger and more robust because it must lift the heavy hammer that strikes the great bell. The pegs that release the strike are set into a large wooden barrel, a cylinder marked with notches and pins that correspond to the hours. You trace the line of the pegs with your eyes, noting how each one is positioned to lift the striking lever at exactly the right moment, and you see the peg for the next hour waiting in its place, patient and ready. The hammer itself is somewhere above, in the bell chamber, but its connecting rod descends through the ceiling and attaches to the lever with a simple iron pin that moves freely in its socket. You open a small wooden cupboard built into the clock frame, and inside you find the oil pot and the winding crank, both resting on a shelf lined with felt that has grown thin and threadbare with age. The oil pot is a small stoneware jar with a cork stopper, and when you lift it, you feel the weight of the oil inside, a thick amber liquid that smells of linseed and something older, something earthy and faintly sweet. The winding crank is a wrought iron handle with a wooden grip that has been polished smooth by the palms of many hands, and you take it out and hold it for a moment, feeling its solid weight and the way the iron is slightly warm from being stored in the enclosed space. You consider winding the clock, but the weights are still high, their ropes coiled neatly on the drums, and there is no need to turn the crank today. You return the crank to its shelf and close the cupboard door, which latches with a small wooden peg that fits into a leather loop. The clock will run for another day at least before the weights descend far enough to require winding, and you note this fact with a quiet satisfaction, a small piece of knowledge that you will carry with you when you leave the room. The fog has seeped into the clock room more than you initially noticed, and as you stand still you become aware of the many small ways in which the damp air has touched the mechanism. The iron components were a silvery bloom as mentioned, but there is also a faint smell of wet wood, not rot, but simply the scent of oak that has absorbed moisture from the air and is slowly releasing it again. The floorboards have swollen slightly, their edges pressing together more tightly than usual, and the door to the stairwell fits more snugly in its frame than it does in dry weather. A single droplet of condensation hangs from the lowest point of an iron cross brace, a perfect sphere of water that catches the light and holds it like a tiny crystal, and you watch it for a long moment, waiting for it to fall. But it does not. You walk to the center of the room and place your hand on the main upright of the clock frame, feeling the wood under your palm. The oak is smooth and slightly cool, its grain raised in fine ridges that your fingers can trace like the lines on a map. The wood has darkened with age to a deep brown black, and in places where the oil has dripped and soaked in over the years, it has taken on a nearly black sheen that reflects the grey light in a soft, muted glow. You feel the faint vibration of the escapement through the wood, a tiny hum that is more a suggestion of movement than actual movement, and you close your eyes for a moment to focus on that sensation, letting it fill your awareness completely. When you open your eyes again, the light in the room has changed slightly, the fog outside having shifted or thinned just enough to allow a little more daylight through the small window. The grey glow now touches the far side of the clock frame, illuminating the strike barrel and the line of pegs with a soft, even radiance. You can see the individual grain lines in the oak more clearly now, and the iron pegs stand out as dark shapes against the lighter wood, their tips slightly polished where the striking lever rubs against them each hour. The mechanism is so still, so completely at rest, that it seems frozen in time, a tableau of wood and iron that has no connection to the world outside, except through the slow, patient turning of the escapement wheel. You spend a long time simply standing and listening to the steady pulse of the clock. The tick is a sound that invites stillness, a sound that asks the listener to stop and pay attention and do nothing else. You let the rhythm settle into your breathing so that each inhale spans several ticks and each exhale spans several more, and you find that your thoughts have slowed to match the pace of the mechanism, becoming quiet and simple and without any urgency. The clock does not hurry, and neither do you, and in this shared slowness there is a deep and peaceful harmony. The other sounds of the tower are present here too, though they are softer and more distant. You can hear very faintly the drip of condensation falling somewhere in the bell chamber above, a sound that comes at irregular intervals and is followed by a tiny echo that dies almost immediately. You can hear the even fainter hiss of the fog as it moves past the arrow slits on the stairs below, a sound that is more a feeling in the air than a true noise. And you can hear, beneath everything, the deep silence of the stone itself, the heavy, ancient quiet of the walls that have stood for so long they have forgotten what it means to be anything other than still. You walk a slow circuit of the room, touching each of the 4 walls in turn. The north wall is cold and slightly damp, the stone blocks bearing a faint bloom of salts that have leached out of the mortar over centuries. The south wall is drier, its surface smoother, and a small wooden shelf is attached to it with iron brackets that match the candle bracket in the rope chamber below. On this shelf rests a spare candle and a tinder box, both arranged neatly and waiting for the time when they will be needed. The east wall holds the small window, and you pause there to look out at the grey nothingness that presses against the glass. The fog is still thick, though you sense that it has begun to thin just a little, the light growing slowly brighter as the morning advances somewhere beyond the mist. The west wall has no features except the door through which you entered, and you return to it and stand with your back against the cool stone, looking at the clock from a slight distance. From this angle, the clock appears almost like a living creature, a great beast of wood and iron that has made its home in this small room and will remain here long after you are gone. The escapement wheel continues its steady turning, the weights hang motionless, the pegs wait in their careful arrangement, and the whole mechanism breathes its slow metallic breath without any need for your attention or intervention. You are simply a visitor here, a guest in the clock's quiet domain, and the clock asks nothing of you except that you be still and listen. A long time passes, or perhaps only a short time, because in the clock room time behaves differently, stretching and compressing according to its own rules rather than those of the world outside. You could stay here for hours, and indeed you have done so on other foggy mornings, when the silence and the steady tick seem to hold you in place like a gentle hand on your shoulder. But eventually you feel a small shift in your own body, a quiet signal that it is time to continue upward toward the bells that wait in the chamber above, and you push yourself away from the wall with a gentle movement that makes no sound at all. You walk to the door and pause with your hand on the latch, turning back one last time to look at the clock room. The light has brightened just a little more, and now you can see the fine dust motes that drift through the air, caught in the beam from the window and glowing like tiny specks of gold. The clock ticks on, steady and unhurried, and you feel a quiet gratitude for its presence, for the simple fact of its existence in this small room at the top of the stairs. Then you lift the latch and step back out onto the landing, closing the door behind you with a soft, careful click that does not disturb the silence at all. The stair continues upward from here, one more flight to the bell chamber, and you begin to climb it with the same steady pace you have maintained throughout the morning. The air grows cooler again, the fog pressing closer through the arrow slits, and the sound of the clock fades slowly behind you as you rise toward the great bronze voices that have been waiting for you all along. The final flight of stairs rises from the clock room, landing in a tighter spiral than any you have climbed so far, the steps narrower and the walls closer, as if the tower is drawing itself inward to concentrate its strength for the great weight it must support above. Your shoulder brushes the outer stone with every step, and your hand on the newel post feels the cool, polished surface that has been worn to a dark gloss by centuries of palms pressing upward toward the bells. The grey light that filtered through the clock-room window has followed you up these last turns, growing slowly brighter with each step until, as you round the final curve, the stairwell opens suddenly into a wide, airy space that takes your breath away, not with exertion, but with its unexpected vastness. You step into the bell chamber and pause just beyond the topmost tread, your feet finding the solid oak planks of the floor while your eyes adjust to the quality of the light. This light is unlike any other in the tower, a soft, silvery glow that enters from four directions through the great louvered openings set high in each wall, their slanting boards angled to keep out rain but admit the sky. The fog that has been a constant companion on your climb now fills these openings with a moving, shifting presence, a pale vapor that drifts through the louvers in slow curtains, curling around the heavy timber frames and spilling into the chamber like a slow tide of mist. The air here is cooler than anywhere else in the tower, fresher too, carrying the clean, cold scent of cloud and the faint, distant smell of the wet earth far below. The bell chamber is a square room, larger than the clock room below, but dominated so completely by the great bell that it seems smaller than it is. The ceiling rises high above you, the underside of the tower's peaked roof, its massive oak rafters joined with wooden pegs and darkened by age to the color of strong tea. From the central ridge beam, a huge horizontal timber is suspended by iron straps, and from this headstock hangs the largest bell in the tower, a great bronze shape that fills the chamber with its silent presence. The bell is wider than a man's outstretched arms and taller than a man's chest, its waist curving outward in a smooth, gentle swell before tapering to the sound bow at the bottom. Its surface is a deep, dark grey-green, the color of old bronze that has been touched by centuries of damp air, and in the soft fog light it seems almost to absorb the glow rather than reflect it, a dense, heavy shape of absolute stillness. You stand near the top of the stairs and simply look at the bell for a long, quiet moment. There is no hurry to move, no need to do anything but observe, and the bell seems to appreciate the stillness, as if it has been waiting here in the fog for this exact form of attention. The fog drifts through the louvers in gentle eddies, and as it passes around the bell, it swirls slightly, disturbed by the great bulk of bronze, leaving trails of vapor that curl around the crown and the cannons and the iron clapper, hanging dark and heavy inside. The whole chamber is in slow, silent motion, the mist moving, the light shifting, the shadows deepening and fading, but the bell remains utterly still, a fixed point in a world of soft grey flux. You walk slowly into the center of the chamber, your footsteps sounding hollow on the oak planks, and the sound is swallowed almost immediately by the fog and the open spaces of the louvers. The floorboards here are wider than those in the rope chamber, laid down in a time when great trees were still available to the carpenters, and their grain is raised and textured, the softer summer wood worn away by centuries of feet, so that the harder winter rings stand up in subtle ridges under your soles. You feel these ridges through your shoes, a faint map of the tree's own life, and you follow them with your steps as you approach the bell. The headstock from which the bell hangs is a massive oak beam, its end set into the stone walls of the tower on iron bearings that allow the whole assembly to rock back and forth when the bell is rung. The beam is black with age, its surface rough with the marks of the adze that shaped it, and it is bound with iron straps that run around its girth and are bolted through with heavy square nuts. The camins, the iron loops at the top of the bell that connect it to the headstock, are thick and dark, their surfaces pitted with tiny rust plumes that have been polished away in the high spots by the constant subtle movement of the bell settling on its bearings. A wheel, a great wooden circle with a grooved rim, is attached to one end of the headstock, and the bell rope that you handled in the chamber below passes over this wheel before descending through the floor, the hemp dark and glossy where it runs against the wood. You walk a slow, deliberate circle around the bell, your left hand reaching out to touch the bronze as you go. The surface is cool under your fingertips, far cooler than the air around it, and it has a texture that is both smooth and faintly rough, like the skin of a fruit that has been polished by wind and rain. The patina is not uniform, varying from a deep, lustrous green in the protected areas under the inscription bands to a lighter, grayer color where the fog has licked most frequently against the metal. Tiny pits and irregularities mark the surface, the legacy of the casting process and the slow work of time, and your fingers explore these imperfections with a gentle, curious touch, reading the bell's history through its skin. At the sound bow, the thickest part of the bell where the clapper strikes, the bronze is slightly shinier, polished by the repeated impact of iron on bronze over countless ringings. You run your palm over this area and feel the smooth, almost slick surface, a patch of brightness in the general matte of the patina, and you feel also the faintest vibration still lingering from the last time the bell was rung, or perhaps it is only your imagination, a memory of sound that your hand expects to find. The edge of the sound bow is a perfect circle, its lip rounded and thick, and you trace its curve with your finger, following it around until you have completed a full circuit and return to where you started. Above the sound bow, the waist of the bell rises in a smooth, slightly convex curve, and here you find the inscription. It is a band of raised letters that runs all the way around the bell's circumference, each letter cast into the bronze when the bell was made. The letters are a mixture of Latin and Old Script, their shapes angular and slightly irregular, the work of a craftsman who pressed the mold by hand. You cannot read all of the words, partly because the fog light is too dim, and partly because the letters are worn in places, but you can feel them clearly under your fingertips, the sharp edges and the smooth curves of each character, the spaces between words, the small decorative stops that mark the ends of phrases. You close your eyes and let your fingers move across the inscription, reading by touch, a message that has been waiting here for centuries, a dedication or a prayer, or simply the name of the bell and the year of its casting. The bronze is colder here, where the inscription band creates a slight thickening of the metal, and your fingers slow as they pass over each letter, savoring the quiet language of shape and texture. The clapper hangs silently inside the bell, suspended from an iron staple set into the crown. It is a heavy rod of wrought iron, thicker than your wrist at its top and tapering to a rounded ball at its striking end, the whole thing dark with a black oxide that leaves a faint grey smudge on your finger if you touch it. The ball is slightly larger than a man's closed fist, its surface roughened by the many times it has struck the bronze, and a small flat spot marks the exact point of contact. A tiny facet that fits the sound bow like a key fits a lock. You reach up and touch the clapper gently, feeling its weight and its solidity, the way it hangs perfectly vertical and perfectly still. It is heavier than it looks, as all well-made things are, and when you push it slightly with your fingertip, it moves with a slow, pendulum swing that takes many seconds to come to rest, the iron creaking softly in its staple. The louvers draw your attention as you complete your circle. There are 4 of them, 1 in each wall. Their wooden slats angled steeply downward so that the fog can enter, but the rain cannot. The slats are grey with age, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and water, and in the spaces between them you can see the drifting, shifting whiteness of the fog, a moving tapestry of vapour that never repeats the same pattern twice. The air that enters through the louvers is fresh and cool, and it carries with it the quiet smell of wet slate from the roof above, and the deeper, earthier scent of the forest that lies somewhere beyond the village, a smell of wet leaves and moss and the dark soil under old trees. You walk to the north louver and stand before it, letting the cool mist wash over your face. The fog here is so thick that you can see nothing beyond the opening. No sky, no clouds, no distant hills, only the endless, shifting grey that seems to go on forever in all directions. The mist condenses on your eyelashes and on the wool of your hood, tiny droplets that gather and sparkle faintly in the diffuse light before running together and falling, and you feel a deep, quiet peace settle over you like a second cloak. You could stand here for hours, watching the fog move, and indeed you have done so on other mornings, when the world was hidden and the bell was silent, and there was nothing to do but wait and breathe. The South Louver offers a slightly different view, or rather a different quality of fog, because here the mist is thinner, and you can just make out the shape of the tower's own roof below, the steeply pitched slates, dark with moisture, and the lead flashing gleaming dully along the ridges. A single jackdaw sits on the ridge, its black feathers ruffled against the damp, and it watches you with one bright eye before shaking itself and flying off into the grey, its call a sharp metallic note that is swallowed instantly by the fog. You watch the bird disappear and then turn back to the bell, which has remained perfectly still through all of this, waiting as it has waited for so long. The east louver is the smallest of the 4, its opening partially blocked by the headstock beam that runs close to the wall, and you have to duck slightly to stand before it. The fog here is tinged with a faint, pale warmth that might be the sun trying to break through the clouds far away, and the light that enters is a soft, golden grey that makes the bronze of the bell look almost warm. You place your hand on the sill and feel the cold, damp stone, and you notice that a small cushion of moss has grown in the corner where the louver frame meets the wall, a patch of bright green that seems impossibly vivid in the otherwise monochrome world of the bell chamber. The moss is soft and springy under your finger, and a tiny droplet of water sits in the center of each leaf, catching the light like a miniature jewel. You return to the bell and stand before it once more, your hands resting on the cool bronze. The bell is so large that you feel dwarfed by it. But the feeling is not one of intimidation, rather a sense of quiet companionship, as if the bell recognizes your presence and accepts it without question. You have come here many times, and each time the bell has been the same, patient and silent and heavy with the weight of its own purpose. And each time you have felt the same calm certainty that this is exactly where you're supposed to be, in this tower, on this morning, with this fog and this silence and this great bronze voice waiting to be awakened. You tap the bell gently with your knuckle, a soft, small impact that produces not a ring but a dull, muted thud that dies almost immediately, absorbed by the thickness of the bronze and the fog that fills the chamber. The bell is too large to ring with a tap. It needs the full swing of the clapper and the rocking of the headstock to find its voice. But the small sound is satisfying in its own way, a reminder that the bell is real and solid and present. The vibration travels through the metal and into your hand, a tiny shiver that fades as quickly as it came, and you feel the bell's weight and density communicated directly to your bones. The fog has thickened again while you were standing here, the louvers now admitting a denser, whiter mist that pools on the floor around the base of the bell and swirls around your ankles. The light has dimmed slightly, the sun having lost its brief struggle against the clouds, and the bell chamber has returned to its soft, grey quiet. The only sounds are the faint drip of condensation from the rafters, the whisper of the fog through the louvers, and the distant, barely perceptible tick of the clock mechanism filtering up through the floorboards. These sounds are so soft and so constant that they have become more like textures than noises, a gentle background of stillness that makes the silence feel deeper rather than broken. You walk a second circle around the bell, this time more slowly, your hand never leaving the bronze. You feel again the inscription band and the tiny pits, the polished sound bow and the rough iron staple, the cool smoothness of the crown and the gentle curve of the waist. You notice details that you missed on the first circuit, a small casting floor near the top that looks like a tiny crater, a patch of brighter patina where a hand has touched the same spot many times, a faint scratch left by a tool during the bell's installation long ago. These details are like words in a book that you have read many times, each rereading revealing something new and yet reassuringly familiar, and you tuck them away in your memory without conscious effort. Finally you stop on the west side of the bell, facing the door that leads back down to the stairs, and you let your hands fall to your sides. The bell stands before you, massive and silent, and you feel a quiet readiness beginning to stir in your chest, the knowledge that the next part of the morning's work is about to begin. But for now you simply stand and breathe the cool, fog-laden air, letting the peace of the bell chamber fill you completely. The bell waits as it has always waited, and you wait with it, two silent figures in the grey heart of the tower, wrapped in mist and patience, and the slow, steady turning of the world. You descend the stairs from the bell chamber with a different quality of attention than you brought to the climb. The great bell has worked a small change in you, a quiet readiness that now hums softly in your chest and in the palms of your hands, and as you retrace the spiral downward, your steps feel more purposeful without being hurried, more grounded without being heavy. The fog drifts down with you, curling along the newel post and spilling over the worn treads like a slow grey stream. and you feel its cool touch on your cheeks and on the back of your neck, where the wool of your hood has fallen away. The stairs that seemed so steep on the way up now feel familiar and welcoming, each step a known quantity, each turn a remembered curve. You pass the clockroom door without opening it, though you hear the steady tick still sounding from within, the escapement wheel turning with its patient, unhurried rhythm, and the sound follows you down for a turn or two before fading into the deeper quiet of the lower tower. Your hand on the newel post feels the slight crack you noticed earlier, the hairline fissure that runs from one mortar joint to the next, and you register it as a familiar landmark, a sign that you are nearing the intermediate chamber. The air grows slightly warmer as you descend, the chill of the bell chamber giving way to the still, settled coolness of the tower's middle levels, and the smell of hemp and beeswax begins to reach you again, faint at first and then stronger as you round the final curve. You step onto the wooden platform of the intermediate chamber, and the planks creak under your weight with the same soft, hollow sound they made before. The candle on its iron bracket has burnt down another fraction of an inch, the flame now distinctly shorter and more blue at its base, and the wax pool in the tin dish has deepened so that the light must struggle through a thicker layer of molten wax before reaching the air. But the flame still burns steadily, its amber glow still touching the rope coils and the peg rail and the central stone pillar with a warm, patient light. The chamber is exactly as you left it, the ropes hanging in their quiet circle, the dust motes drifting slowly through the still air, the fog pressing its grey presence against the arrow slit on the stairwell outside the door. You walk to the peg rail and stand before the great bell's rope, the largest coil of all, its dark green sally almost black in the candlelight. This is the moment you have been climbing toward, the moment the whole tower has been waiting for, and yet there is no urgency in it at all, no sense of climax or culmination. The moment is simply here, quiet and patient, and you step into it as easily as you step from one tread to the next. You reach out with both hands and lift the coil from its peg, feeling the familiar weight of the great rope settle into your palms, the rough hemp biting gently against your skin, the sally's thick wool warm and slightly greasy from the oils of countless hands. You position yourself beneath the rope, your feet set a shoulder's width apart on the wooden planks, your body aligned with the line of the hemp as it rises through the ceiling collar and up to the wheel in the bell chamber above. The rope hangs straight and still, a vertical line of darkness against the dim amber glow of the candle, and you take the sally in both hands with a grip that is firm but not tense, your fingers wrapping around the wool with the ease of long practice. The sally fills your hands completely, its thickness such that your fingertips just meet your thumbs, and you feel the slight springiness of the wool and the harder core of the hemp beneath it. You stand there for a long moment holding the rope but not yet pulling, letting your body settle into the position and your breathing slow to a deep, even rhythm. The first pull is always the same, a gentle, exploratory movement that asks the bell to wake rather than commanding it. You bend your knees slightly and draw the rope downward with a smooth, steady motion, feeling the weight of the bell transmit itself through the hemp and into your arms and shoulders and back. The rope moves perhaps 2 feet, and far above you hear the great bell begin to rock on its bearings, the massive bronze shape tilting on the headstock, the clapper swinging slowly inside. The sound that follows is not a full ring, but a soft, deep note that seems to gather itself from the very metal of the bell, and then bloom outward into the fog, a single pulse of bronze-tone vibration that fills the tower and then fades slowly, slowly, leaving a long, shimmering resonance that hangs in the air for many seconds before dying into silence. You wade through the resonance, your hands still holding the sally, your body still, and listening. The note travels outward through the louvers of the bell chamber and into the fog beyond, a sound that must carry across the village and the fields and the distant hills, though today it will be swallowed by the mist before it goes very far, muffled and softened until it becomes only a felt presence rather than a heard sound, a low vibration that people in their cottages will sense more than hear, a gentle hum that passes through walls and windows and closed doors without asking permission. When the silence has returned, full and deep and complete, you pull the rope again. This second pull is a little firmer, a little more certain, and the bell above responds with a stronger note, the clapper striking the sound bow with a clean, solid impact that you feel through the rope as a tiny kick against your palms. The note is deeper than the first, the bronze finding its full voice now, and the sound rolls outward in a slow, expanding circle that seems to push the fog back for just a moment before the mist closes in again. You wait through this resonance too, letting the sound fade completely before you move again, because there is no hurry and the bell must be allowed to finish its song before the next note begins. A rhythm begins to establish itself, not a hurried rhythm, but a slow, measured sequence that matches the pace of your own breathing. Pull and wait, pull and wait, pull and wait, each cycle lasting perhaps 10 or 12 seconds, each note given its full time to sing and fade before the next note takes its place. Your body moves in a gentle rocking motion, your knees bending and straightening, your arms rising and falling, your shoulders rolling with the weight of the rope. The motion is not strenuous, the great bell is heavy, but the wheel and the headstock take much of the effort, and you could ring for a long time without tiring, your body moving through the familiar pattern with the ease of a walker on a level path. The sound of the bell is remarkable in its depth and richness, a note so low and so full that it seems to contain many other notes within it, a whole chord of overtones that shimmer and shift as the resonance decays. The fundamental note is a deep bronze hum that vibrates in your chest and in the floorboards under your feet, a physical sensation as much as an auditory one. Above this fundamental, the higher partials ring out with a clearer, brighter tone, the sound of the bell's upper body and shoulders singing in harmony with the great slow voice of the sound bow. And above even these, a very high, very faint note can sometimes be heard, a tiny, silvery ping that appears briefly at the moment of the strike, and then fades almost immediately, like a spark that flies from a hammer and dies before it hits the ground. You ring the bell 10 times, 12 times, 15 times, and each pull feels slightly different from the one before, the rope's tension varying subtly as the bell swings on its bearings, the hemp stretching and relaxing with each cycle. Your hands learn these variations without conscious thought, adjusting their grip and their timing to match the bell's own rhythm, finding the sweet spot where the pull is neither too hard nor too soft, where the clapper strikes the sound bow with exactly the right force to produce a full, round note without any harshness or edge. This is the skill of bell ringing, a skill that cannot be taught in words, but only learned through long practice, through countless hours of pulling ropes and listening to bells and letting the body find its own wisdom. The fog outside seems to respond to the bell's voice, or perhaps it is only your imagination, but as you ring you notice that the mist has begun to move a little more actively through the louvers above, as if the sound waves are stirring the vapor into slow, swirling patterns. The fog curls and drifts around the bell chamber, and tiny droplets of condensed moisture fall from the rafters with soft, irregular plinks that punctuate the silences between the notes. The whole tower seems to be breathing with you. The bell's voice and the fog's movement and the steady tick of the clock all woven together into a single, slow fabric of sound and stillness. You pause after a while and let the rope rest in your hands, the sally warm from your grip, the hemp slightly damp from the moisture in the air. The bell above continues to rock very slightly on its bearings, the last vibrations dying away into a hum so low and so soft that it is more a memory of sound than sound itself. The silence that follows the final note is immense, a deep, soft absence that fills the tower from the foundations to the roof peak, and you stand within it like a figure in a painting, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. Your breathing the only movement in the whole vast space. The rope settles against your palms, its weight a familiar comfort, and you listen to the silence with the same attention you gave to the bell's voice. The silence is not empty. You have learned this over many years of ringing. It is full of small, soft presences that make themselves known only when the great sound has faded. The drip of condensation from the rafters, the whisper of fog through the louvers, the creak of cooling bronze as the bell settles on its headstock, the distant, barely perceptible tick of the clock, and beneath all of these, the deepest silence of all, the silence of the stone itself, the ancient, patient quiet that has filled this tower since the day the first block was laid. You lift the rope again and begin a new sequence of pulls, this time slower still, each note separated by a long, thoughtful pause in which you listen to the full decay of the previous note before sounding the next. The bell's voice is different at this pace, more solemn perhaps, more deliberate, each note a complete statement rather than part of a continuous flow. The fog receives each note and holds it for a moment before letting it go, and the sound seems to spread outward in concentric circles that you can almost see, ripples of bronze-toned vibration moving through the grey air like rings on dark water. Your mind has grown very quiet as you ring, the repetitive motion and the slow rhythm having lulled your thoughts into a state of calm, open awareness that is neither focused nor unfocused, but somewhere between the two, a floating attention that notices everything and attaches to nothing. The feel of the rope in your hands, the sound of the bell above, the cool touch of the fog on your face, the steady rocking motion of your body, all of these are present in your awareness without any one of them dominating. A balanced, peaceful state that is one of the quiet gifts of bell ringing. Eventually you let the final pull complete itself, and you stand with the rope resting in your hands, the last note fading into the fog, and the silence returning like a tide coming in. The bell above has come to rest, the clapper hanging still and vertical, the great bronze shape motionless on its bearings. The ringing is finished for now, though you will return later to sound the hour, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that has no sharp edges, just a soft, diffuse sense of work, well done, a task completed with care and attention, and now set aside until it is needed again. You coil the great rope back onto its peg with the same careful figure-8 pattern you used before, and you step back from the peg rail to look at the chamber once more. The candle flame wavers slightly, the ropes hang in their patient circle, the dust motes drift through the amber light, and the fog continues its slow, silent movement outside the arrow slit. Everything is in order, everything is as it should be, and you are simply another part of that order, a presence that came and rang the bell and will now continue on to the next small task, leaving the tower a little more awake than it was before. The hour approaches, though you do not know this by any clock face or sundial or herald of the passing time, because the fog has wrapped the tower so completely that even the slow brightening of the day has become imperceptible. Instead, you know it by a subtle shift in your own body, a quiet inner signal that has been trained by years of keeping the bells, a sense that the moment is nearly here. You stand in the intermediate chamber with the great rope still coiled on its peg, the candle still burning its steady amber flame, the fog still pressing its grey presence against the arrow slit, and you feel the hour gathering itself in the silence like water gathering behind a dam. The clock mechanism above you has been ticking steadily through all of your ringing, its escapement wheel turning with that patient, unhurried rhythm that asks nothing of the world except to be allowed to continue. Now, as the hour nears, you become aware of a new sound filtering down from the clockroom, a soft mechanical whir as the striking train begins to prepare itself. The pegs on the great wooden barrel are moving into position, the levers lifting and aligning, the hammer readying itself above the great bell. You listen to these sounds with a quiet, practiced attention, hearing in them the familiar sequence that will culminate in the release of the strike. You walk to the peg rail and lift the rope for the clock strike. This rope is different from the great bell's rope, thinner and lighter, its hemp a paler colour and its sally a faded yellow that was once perhaps a bright gold. The clock rope does not connect to a wheel and headstock like the ringing rope. Instead, it runs directly to the striking hammer, a simple mechanism that lifts the heavy iron clapper and lets it fall against the sound bow of the great bell. The pull is shorter and sharper than the ringing pull, a single clean motion that trips the release and lets the hammer do its work, and you have performed this motion so many times that your hand knows the exact distance and the exact force required before your mind can even form the intention. You position yourself beneath the clock rope, your feet set on the wooden planks, your body aligned with the line of the hemp as it rises through the ceiling collar. The sally is warm in your hands, the wool slightly more worn than the other sallies, because this rope is used more frequently, pulled every hour of every day and every night, year after year, through fog and rain and frost and the rare bright sun of summer afternoons. The wool is napped and soft, the fibres standing up in tiny ridges that catch the candlelight, and a faint darker patch near the top marks the spot where your grip always falls. You wait, the rope held loosely in your hands, your breathing slow and even. The clock mechanism above continues its preparations, the whir of the striking train growing more pronounced as the pegs align and the levers engage. Then, with a soft, final click that you feel through the floorboards as much as you hear it, the mechanism reaches its release point and the first stroke is ready. You pull the rope downward with a firm, deliberate motion, feeling the hammer lift above you and then release, falling against the bronze with a deep, resonant note that is different from the ringing note, more sudden and more declarative, a sound that says the hour has come. The first stroke blooms outward into the fog, a great bronze wave of sound that fills the tower and then spills through the louvers and into the grey world beyond. You count the stroke in a whisper, your voice barely audible even to yourself, the number one spoken into the muffled air, and then swallowed by the resonance of the bell. The note fades slowly, the overtones shimmering and dying in their familiar order, the high, bright partials fading first and the deep, fundamental hum lasting longest, until finally the silence returns and you stand waiting, the rope still in your hands, your ears filled with the memory of the sound. You pull the rope again, and the second stroke rings out, a perfect twin to the first, the same depth and richness and the same slow, patient decay. You count 2 in your whisper, and then wait through the long resonance, letting the sound travel outward as far as it can before the fog catches it and holds it, and finally absorbs it into the grey, wet air. The interval between strokes is longer than the interval between ringing pulls, perhaps 15 or 20 seconds, because the hour stroke is a measured, solemn thing that must not be hurried, each note a complete statement that must be allowed to finish before the next begins. 3. You whisper as the third stroke sounds, and the bell's voice seems to grow even deeper with each repetition, the bronze warming to its task, the clapper finding its exact place on the sound bow, the whole great mass of metal vibrating with a full, round voice that has been the same for centuries and will be the same for centuries more. The fog outside stirs with each stroke, the sound waves pushing through the mist in invisible circles that you can almost feel. A gentle pressure against your skin that is not quite touch and not quite hearing, but something between the two. 4. And your body has settled into the rhythm of the strike, your arms pulling and releasing with a smooth, automatic motion that requires no thought, your mind free to simply listen and count and be present in the slow, solemn progression of the hour. The candle flame wavers with each stroke, disturbed by the vibration of the air, and the shadows in the chamber shift and dance, and then settle back into stillness as the resonance fades. 5. And you become aware of the silence between the strokes as a presence in its own right, a deep, soft absence that is as much a part of the hour as the sound itself. The silence is not empty, you know this well. It is full of small, quiet things that make themselves known only when the great note has faded. The drip of condensation from the rafters, the whisper of the fog through the louvers, the creak of the cooling bronze as the bell settles briefly on its bearings, and beneath all of these, the steady, patient tick of the clock mechanism still turning, still keeping its own time regardless of the hour being sounded. 6. And you have reached the halfway point of the hour, the midpoint of the sequence, and you pause for a fraction of a second longer than usual, not intentionally, but simply because the weight of the number feels different, a small hinge in the progression of the count. The 6th stroke rings out and fades, and the silence that follows seems deeper than the silences before, as if the tower itself is listening, waiting for the count to continue. 7. And the note seems to carry a slightly different quality, a subtle shift in the overtones that only the most attentive ear would notice, the bronze vibrating in a slightly different pattern as the bell adjusts to the repeated strikes. Your hands feel the tiny variations in the rope's tension, the way the hemp stretches and relaxes with each pull, the way the sally grows warmer and more pliable under your grip. 8. And you think of the village below, though only in the most distant and abstract way, imagining the people in their cottages hearing the strokes through the fog and counting along in their own quiet minds, marking the passage of the morning and the approach of their own small tasks and duties. The sound of the bell is a public thing, a shared marker of time that belongs to everyone and no one, and you are simply the hands that release it, the agent of a moment that will be heard by the baker and the blacksmith and the shepherd on the hill, and the old woman in her garden, and the children at their lessons. 9. And the fog seems to be thinning just slightly outside the louvers, the light growing a little brighter as the morning advances somewhere beyond the mist. A pale silver glow now fills the bell chamber above you, filtering down through the ceiling holes and touching the ropes with a cooler, cleaner light than the amber of the candle. The shadows in the intermediate chamber have softened, their edges less sharp, and the dust motes drifting through the air now sparkle with tiny points of silver instead of gold. 10. And your voice has settled into a rhythm of its own, the whispered numbers coming at exactly the same point in each cycle, just after the strike and just before the resonance begins its slow fade. The counting is a meditation, a quiet focus that keeps your mind anchored in the present moment, stroke by stroke, number by number, and you find a deep, calm satisfaction in the simple act of counting, of marking the hour as it passes. 11, and the penultimate stroke rings out with a particular clarity, the bronze singing its full round note as if it knows that the sequence is nearly complete. You feel the vibration through the floorboards and through the rope and through the very air itself, a low physical hum that resonates in your chest and in the bones of your skull, a sound so deep and so full that it seems to come from everywhere at once. 12, you whisper, and you pull the rope for the final time, the last stroke of the hour, the completing note that closes the sequence and returns the tower to silence. This final pull feels slightly different from the others, as final pulls always do. A small extra weight in the rope, a tiny extra resonance in the note. A sense of completion that is not dramatic, but simply quiet and whole and satisfying. The 12th stroke blooms outward into the fog, and then begins its slow decay, the overtones shimmering and fading one by one, the deep fundamental hum lasting longer than any of the others, a low bronze-tone vibration that seems to hang in the air for an impossibly long time before it finally gently fades into silence. You stand with the rope still in your hands, your breathing slow and deep, your body still and listening. The silence that follows the final stroke is immense, a great soft absence that fills the tower, from the foundations to the roof peak. A silence so deep and so complete that it seems almost like a sound in its own right, a low, quiet note that no bell can ring and no voice can sing. You let the silence wash over you and through you, feeling it settle into the stone and the wood and the hemp of the ropes, feeling it wrap itself around the candle flame and the drifting dust motes and the cool, damp air. After a long while you move, coiling the clock rope back onto its peg with the same careful figure-8 pattern you always use, the hemp still warm from your hands, the sally slightly compressed where your grip held it. You step back from the peg rail and look at the 5 ropes hanging in their patient circle, each one still and silent now, their work done for the moment. The candle flame wavers slightly, a tiny movement that catches your eye, and you see that the wax pool has risen almost to the top of the tin dish, the old candle very near its end. The fog outside the arrow slit has continued its slow brightening, the grey now tinged with a faint, pale warmth that might be the sun struggling to break through the clouds. The light that enters the chamber is cooler and cleaner than before, a soft pearl-grey glow that touches the ropes and the peg rail and the central stone pillar with a gentle, even radiance. The morning has advanced while you were ringing, though you could not say exactly how much time has passed, because time in the tower moves differently than it does in the world outside, slower and more patient, measured not in minutes, but in strokes and silences and the slow decay of bronze notes in fog. You stand in the quiet chamber for a while longer, not because there is anything left to do, but because the silence is so deep and so peaceful that leaving it feels like leaving a warm room for a cold night. The tower holds you gently, asking nothing, expecting nothing, accepting nothing, simply allowing you to be still within its ancient walls. The drip of condensation falls somewhere above, the clock ticks its steady rhythm one floor up, the fog drifts and curls through the louvers, and you are simply present, a quiet figure in a quiet place, the sound of the 12 strokes still echoing faintly in your memory, if not in the air. And then, gradually and without any sense of decision, you find yourself turning toward the door and the stair beyond it, ready to begin the slow descent back to the earth and the fog and the world that waits below. The hour has been sounded. The 12 strokes have faded into the fog, and the silence that follows them is a deep, soft presence that fills the intermediate chamber like water, filling a basin. You stand at the peg rail for a while longer, your hands resting on the worn oak, your breathing slow and even, your whole body suffused with a quiet calm that the ringing has left behind like a gift. The candle on its iron bracket has burnt very low now, the flame a small blue teardrop that barely clears the molten wax pooled in the tin dish, and you know that it will not last much longer. The fog outside the arrow slit has brightened a little more, the grey now touched with a faint, pearlescent quality that speaks of the sun climbing higher somewhere beyond the mist, though here in the tower the light remains soft and diffuse, and without any sharp edges. You turn from the peg rail and begin the small familiar tasks of leaving. The great rope is already coiled neatly on its peg, the figure-8 loops lying flat and even. The clock rope is similarly arranged, its slightly thinner hemp and faded yellow sally marking it as distinct from its companions. You run your hand along the full length of the peg rail one final time, feeling the smooth oak and the slight ridges of the peg ends, checking that each coil is secure and each rope is hanging freely through its ceiling collar without any twist or kink. The blue sally catches your eye, and you remember the thin spot you noticed earlier, the wool worn almost to the hemp beneath. But that is a task for another day, and you let the thought go as easily as it came. The candle flame gives a small final flicker, and then drowns in its own wax pool, a tiny curl of smoke rising from the extinguished wick, and then dispersing into the still air. The chamber dims immediately, the warm amber glow replaced by the cooler, greyer light that filters down from the bell chamber above and seeps in through the arrow slit on the stairwell. The change is not unpleasant, merely different, and your eyes adjust quickly, finding the familiar shapes of the ropes and the pillar and the door without any difficulty. You walk to the door and pause with your hand on the iron latch, looking back one last time at the quiet chamber that has held you through the ringing and the striking of the hour. The ropes hang in their patient circle, the peg rail stands solid against the wall, the tin dish holds its pool of cooling wax, and the fog drifts slowly past the arrow slit outside. Everything is in order. Everything is as it should be. You lift the latch and step out onto the narrow stair, pulling the door closed behind you with a soft click that echoes once and then is gone. The descent begins. The first thing you notice is how different the stairs feel when you are going down. Your body uses different muscles, your feet seeking the treads with a different rhythm, your hand on the newel post sliding downward rather than pulling upward. The steps that seemed so steep on the way up now feel almost gentle, each one a small controlled drop that requires more balance than effort, your knees bending to absorb the impact and your ankles flexing to find the worn hollows that generations of feet have shaped into the stone. You descend slowly, one step at a time, your palm gliding along the cool, polished surface of the newel post as your heels seek the familiar dips and curves of each tread. The spiral wraps around you in the opposite direction now, the outer wall on your left instead of your right, and this small reversal makes the stairwell feel almost new, as if you are traveling through a place you have never been before, even though you know every stone and every crack and every arrow slit by heart. The fog that drifted down with you on your earlier journey still lingers in the stairwell, thin tendrils of mist that curl around the newel post and pool in the corners of the treads, and the air is cool and damp, and smells of wet limestone, and the faint, clean scent of water that has been suspended in cloud for a long time. You pass the first arrow slit, and pause to look out, your hand resting on the slanted stone sill. The fog here is thinner than it was during your climb, the world outside beginning to resolve itself into soft grey shapes that are not yet distinct, but are no longer the uniform blankness of earlier. You can see the dark mass of a yew tree in the churchyard below, its branches still heavy with moisture, and beyond it the suggestion of a cottage roof. The thatch, a darker grey against the lighter grey of the mist. A thin curl of smoke rises from the cottage chimney and is immediately caught by the fog, dissolving into the general haze before it can climb very far. The sight is quiet and distant and faintly dreamlike, a glimpse of a world that is going about its own slow morning while you make your way down through the tower's heart. You continue the descent, your footsteps making a soft rhythmic scuff on the stone that echoes slightly in the narrow space and then fades. The newel post under your hand has grown slightly thicker as you descend, returning to the dimensions you remember from the lower stairs, and the slight crack you noticed during the climb passes under your palm again, a familiar landmark that tells you the clockroom landing is near. The sound of the clock mechanism has grown louder as you approach, the steady tick-tock now a distinct presence in the air, and beneath it you can hear the soft creak of the wooden frame and the faint, rhythmic grinding of the gears as they continue their patient, unceasing work. You reach the clockroom landing and pause with your hand on the door latch, but you do not open it. There is no need to enter the clockroom again. You have already observed the mechanism and noted the height of the weights and the condition of the pegs on the strike barrel, and everything was in order. You stand on the landing for a moment and simply listen to the steady pulse of the escapement wheel through the door, the tick and tock alternating with a regularity that has not faltered for centuries and will not falter for centuries more. The sound is comforting in its constancy, a reminder that the tower keeps its own time regardless of whether anyone is there to hear it, and you feel a quiet gratitude for the old clock and its faithful, unceasing work. You leave the landing and continue down, the stairs now widening slightly as you descend toward the lower levels of the tower. The arrow slits appear more frequently here, and each one shows a slightly brighter view of the world outside, the fog thinning gradually as the morning advances. Through one slit you see the village green, its grass a dark wet green under the mist, the path you walked earlier now visible as a faint lighter line curving across the open space. Through another you see the rooftops of the nearest cottages, their thatch steaming gently as the moisture rises into the cooler air, and beyond them the dark line of the hedgerows that mark the edges of the fields. The world is still wrapped in grey, but the grey is lighter now, more silver than charcoal, and there is a sense that the sun is only a little way above the clouds, waiting for the fog to burn off so that it can reach the earth. Your legs have settled into the rhythm of the descent, the muscles working in a slow, steady harmony that is different from the rhythm of the climb, but equally familiar, equally comforting. The descent asks less of your breathing, which has returned to its normal depth and pace, but more of your balance, your body making tiny adjustments with each step to keep you centered over your feet. Your hand on the newel post bears a little more of your weight than it did during the climb, a gentle braking action that keeps your descent slow and controlled, and you feel the cool stone warm gradually under your palm as the heat of your hand seeps into it. You reach the rope chamber door and pause once more, though this time you do open it, stepping onto the wooden platform with a soft creak of the planks. The chamber is dimmer now that the candle has gone out, the only light coming from the arrow slit on the stairwell, and the faint grey glow that filters down through the ceiling holes from the bell chamber above. The ropes hang in their quiet circle, the peg rail stands solid against the wall, the tin dish holds its pool of cooling wax, and the whole space is so still and so peaceful that you feel a small reluctance to leave it. You walk to the peg rail one last time and touch each rope in turn, feeling the familiar textures of the hemp and the wool, checking that everything is as it should be. The great rope is warm where your hands held it, the clock rope slightly compressed at the grip, the smaller ropes cool and still and waiting. You stand in the center of the chamber and listen to the sounds of the tower. Above you, the clock ticks its steady rhythm, the escapement wheel turning and the pallets engaging and releasing with that soft, precise click that you have heard so many times. Below you, the tower shaft drops away into darkness, the ropes descending through the floor holes and down to the ringing chamber far beneath, though you will not go that way today. The fog presses against the arrow slit with a soft, silent presence, and the drip of condensation falls somewhere in the bell chamber above with a slow, irregular plink that echoes down through the tower's core. You let these sounds wash over you, feeling the deep, layered quiet of the ancient building settle into your bones, and you think that you could stay here for a very long time without any need to move or speak or do anything at all. But eventually you do move, stepping back onto the stair and pulling the chamber door closed behind you with a gentle click. The descent continues, the stairs now becoming the familiar ones of the lower tower, the ones you climb every day and know so well that your feet could find them in complete darkness. The new post is thicker here, the outer wall rougher, the arrow slits larger and more frequent, and the light from outside is brighter, the fog having thinned enough that you can see the churchyard clearly through the openings, the yew trees standing like dark sentinels in the mist, and the gravestones leaning at their gentle angles, their inscriptions softened by centuries of rain and wind. The air grows warmer as you descend, or perhaps it is only that the chill of the upper tower is fading from your skin, replaced by the more moderate temperature of the ground-level air. The smell of the tower changes too, the cold, clean scent of the fog, giving way to the earthier smells of the lower chambers, the dry dust of the stone, and the faint, sweet tang of the beeswax candles burning on the altar in the nave beyond the tower arch. You feel the weight of the morning settling around you, a comfortable, familiar weight that has no urgency or demand, just the quiet presence of the day going about its slow, patient unfolding. You round the final curve of the spiral and see the tower base below you. The small square chamber with its niche of spare candles and its broom of bound twigs and its wooden box of sand for the floor. The first step, the one with the hollow worn into the shape of a right foot, waits at the bottom, and you step onto it with a sense of quiet completion, feeling the familiar curve cup the ball of your foot and guide your heel toward the center. Your hand leaves the newel post and finds the rough stone of the archway, and you step through the low wooden door into the nave of the church. The church is still dim, still quiet, still smelling of old stone and beeswax, and the cool mineral breath of the earth. The single oil lamp near the chancel still burns, its tiny amber point still trembling gently, and the rows of wooden pews still stand in their patient lines, waiting for the congregation that will not arrive for many hours yet. Your footsteps make a soft, rhythmic scuff on the stone flags as you walk toward the south door, passing the font with its glistening carved leaves and the ancient pillars that support the roof, their capitals adorned with simple stone foliage that the fog has touched with a faint, silvery dampness. You reach the south door and pause with your hand on the iron ring, feeling its familiar cold, gritty texture under your palm. The door opens with the same low groan, the same deep sound that seems to rise from the earth itself, and you step out onto the flagstone path that leads across the churchyard toward the village green. The fog is still thick here, thicker than it seemed from the arrow slits above, but it has brightened into a soft pearl-grey mist that is no longer the dense, blank whiteness of early morning. You can see the nearest yew trees clearly now, and the gate in the churchyard wall, and the faint shape of your own cottage across the green, its thatch dark with moisture in its chimney, sending up a thin, straight line of smoke that rises into the mist and disappears. You pull the heavy door closed behind you, and stand on the porch for a moment, feeling the cool, wet air settle on your cheeks and on the wool of your hood. The sound of the bell still seems to ring faintly in your ears, a memory of vibration that will fade only slowly over the course of the morning, and you carry it with you as you begin to walk back across the green, following the same path in reverse, your feet finding the slight dip in the ground worn by countless footsteps over centuries. The fog wraps you gently, the silence of the village holds you softly, and you walk slowly, without hurry, toward your own door and the quiet rest that waits beyond it. You step out from the tower arch into the nave of the church, your feet finding the worn stone flags with a quiet, certain touch, and the space receives you with its familiar smell of old stone and beeswax, and the cool mineral breath of the deep earth beneath the foundations. The single oil lamp near the chancel still burns, its tiny amber point trembling gently in the still air, casting a soft glow that barely reaches the western end where you stand, but is enough to guide your eyes toward the south door. The rows of wooden pews stand in their patient lines on either side, their dark surfaces touched with a faint sheen of moisture that the fog has carried in through every gap and crack. The silence here is different from the silence of the tower, not the layered, waiting quiet of the bells and the clock, but the open, peaceful stillness of a space made for gathering, empty now and yet somehow full of the memory of all the voices that have risen here over the centuries. You walk slowly down the aisle, your footsteps making a soft, rhythmic scuff on the stone that echoes gently among the pillars, and then fades into the high, shadowed roof. The font stands near the door, its carved stone leaves still glistening with condensation that has gathered in the grooves, each droplet catching the faint light and holding it for a moment before another forms beside it. You pass the font and pause, your hand reaching out to touch the cool, damp stone of the basin's rim, feeling the roughness of the carving under your fingertips and the slight gritty texture of the limestone that has been polished smooth only in the spots where countless hands have rested over the years. The water in the font is still and dark, a small perfect circle of silence within the larger silence of the church, and its surface reflects the distant lamp flame as a tiny, wavering point of gold that trembles when you breathe too close, and then steadies when you step back. The south door stands before you, its heavy oak timbers dark with the moisture that the fog has been pressing against it all morning, and the iron handle is cold and slightly wet under your palm as you reach out to take it. You pause with your hand on the ring, feeling the familiar gritty texture of the aged metal and the way the cold seeps slowly into your skin, traveling up through your wrist and fading somewhere in your forearm, just as it did when you first entered the church hours ago, or perhaps only minutes, because time in the tower has a way of stretching and compressing, so that you can never be quite sure how long you have been there. The iron hinges give a low, deep groan as you push the door open, a sound that seems to rise from the very foundations and spread outward through the stone walls and into the fog beyond, and then you step across the threshold and out onto the flagstone path of the porch. The fog has thickened since you were last outside, or perhaps it only seems that way because you have grown accustomed to the slightly thinner air of the upper tower. Now it wraps around you with a cool, wet embrace, heavy with the smell of damp earth and wet thatch, and the faint, clean scent of water that has been suspended in cloud for a long time before finally settling on the village. The flagstones under your feet are slick with moisture, their surfaces gleaming dully in the soft pearl-grey light, and the moss that grows in the cracks between them is a vivid, startling green that seems almost too bright for the muted world around it. You stand on the porch for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the quality of the light and your skin adjust to the temperature of the air, which is warmer than the tower's upper reaches, but still cool enough to raise a slight shiver that passes through you and then is gone. The churchyard yews rise out of the fog like dark green islands in a sea of grey, their branches heavy with gathered moisture that drips slowly, irregularly, onto the wet grass below. Each drop falls with a soft, liquid sound that is swallowed almost immediately by the mist, and the intervals between drops are so long and so unpredictable that you cannot anticipate when the next one will come. A small, quiet uncertainty that keeps your ears gently alert. The gravestones lean at their various angles, their surfaces darkened by the damp and their inscriptions softened into illegibility by centuries of rain and wind and the patient eroding touch of the fog. You know these stones well, their shapes and their positions and the names that they carry, even if you cannot read them, and you walk past them now with the quiet familiarity of someone passing the houses of sleeping neighbours. The path from the porch to the churchyard gate is laid with the same uneven flagstones, each one set at a slightly different angle so that your stride changes rhythm as you walk, a gentle rocking motion that makes the short journey feel like a continuation of the tower's spiral stair, a slow, grounding descent from the heights of the bells to the solid earth of the village. The fog drifts around you as you walk, curling past your shoulders and tangling briefly in the wool of your hood before moving on, and tiny droplets of moisture gather on your eyelashes and on the fine hairs of your cheeks. A cool, delicate touch that you have felt many times before and will feel many times again. The churchyard gate is a simple wooden structure. its bars dark with age, and its iron latch cold and wet under your fingers as you lift it. The gate swings open with a soft creak that is higher pitched than the groan of the church door, a sound like the sleepy call of a bird, and then it swings closed behind you with a gentle thud that echoes once against the stone wall, and then fades into the muffled quiet. You are standing now at the edge of the village green, the open space that you crossed in the early morning when the fog was at its thickest and the world was only a soft grey blankness, and you pause there for a moment to look out at the scene before you. The green has changed since you last saw it, though the change is subtle and would be imperceptible to anyone who had not spent the morning in the tower. The fog is still thick, still wrapping the cottages and the hedgerows and the distant line of the woods in its soft grey veil. But it has brightened a little, the quality of the light shifting from the dense pearlescent grey of early morning to a lighter silver grey that speaks of the sun climbing higher, somewhere above the clouds. The grass of the green is dark and wet, each blade bending under the weight of the gathered moisture, and the path that you walked earlier is still visible as a faint, lighter line curving across the open space. A trail worn by countless feet over countless mornings, just like this one. You begin to walk across the green, following the same path in reverse, your feet finding the slight dip in the ground with the same unthinking certainty they had on the outward journey. The grass is soft and springy under your soles, and the wet blades brush against the leather of your shoes with a soft whispering sound that is the only noise in the whole wide silence of the green. The cottages that ring the open space are still little more than darker patches of grey against the lighter grey of the fog, their thatched roofs dark with moisture, and their walls the same pale stone as the church, and thin curls of smoke rise from a few of the chimneys, climbing a little way into the mist before dissolving into the general haze. Somewhere in one of the cottages a dog barks, a single muffled note that is swallowed immediately by the fog, and then the silence returns, deeper than before. The sound of the bell still seems to ring faintly in your ears as you walk, a memory of vibration that your body holds even though the air itself has been silent for many minutes. This is a phenomenon you know well, the way the great bronze note lingers in the bones and the blood long after it has faded from the audible world, a low, gentle hum that is not quite sound and not quite sensation, but something between the two. You carry it with you across the green, a private fading echo of the hour you sounded, and you find a quiet comfort in its presence, a reminder that your work is done and the tower is at peace. Halfway across the green you pause and turn to look back at the church. The building rises out of the fog like a great sleeping animal, its tower now partially visible, though its upper reaches are still lost in the mist, the louvered openings of the bell chamber hidden from view. The south porch is a dark rectangle in the pale stone, the door closed now and silent, and the yew trees stand on either side like patient guards who have kept their watch for so long that they have forgotten what they are guarding. The whole scene is so quiet, so still, so completely at peace that you feel a deep sense of rightness settle over you, a quiet knowledge that you have done what you came to do, and the world has continued in its slow, patient turning, unchanged and undisturbed. You turn back and continue walking, your own cottage now beginning to take shape ahead of you, its familiar outline emerging from the fog like a face you have known all your life. The thatch is dark with moisture and hangs low over the walls, and the small windows on either side of the door are grey and empty, reflecting nothing but the soft, diffuse light of the fog. The chimney sends up a thin, straight line of smoke that rises a little way and then bends slightly as it meets a current of air too subtle to be called wind, and the smell of the smoke reaches you as you draw nearer, the dry, woody scent of the fire that you laid before you left, and that has been burning slowly through the morning, keeping the cottage warm in your absence. The door of your cottage stands before you now, a simple wooden door with iron strap hinges and a latch much like the ones in the tower, and you pause with your hand on the cool, wet metal, feeling the familiar texture of the iron, and the way the door fits snugly in its frame. The fog has gathered thickly here, pooling in the low spot where the ground slopes slightly toward the threshold, and your feet leave deep, dark prints in the wet grass as you step up to the door. You lift the latch and push the door open, and the warmth of the cottage spills out to meet you, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs and the faint, sweet scent of the beeswax candle that you left burning on the table. You step inside and close the door behind you, and the sound of its closing is a soft, final thud that seals the fog and the cold and the quiet of the green outside, leaving you wrapped in the warm, still air of your own small home. The cottage is dim, the only light coming from the single candle on the table and the low orange glow of the embers in the hearth. But it is enough to see the familiar shapes of the room, the wooden table and the simple chair, the hearth with its iron pot hanging from a hook, the narrow bed in the corner with its wool blankets folded neatly at the foot. The fire has burnt low while you were gone, the embers shifting and settling with soft, whispering sounds, and a thin column of smoke rises from the largest log and curls up into the chimney. You walk to the hearth and stand before it, feeling the warmth of the embers reach out and touch your face and your hands and the front of your wool cloak. The heat is gentle, not fierce, and it seeps slowly into your skin, driving out the chill of the tower and the fog, and replacing it with a deep, spreading comfort that makes your shoulders relax and your breathing slow even further. You take off your cloak and hang it on the wooden peg beside the hearth, where it will dry slowly in the warmth and be ready for the next time you must climb the tower in fog or rain or frost. The wall is damp on the outside, beaded with tiny droplets of condensed mist, and it steams faintly as the heat of the fire begins to work on it. The candle on the table burns with a steady amber flame, its light touching the smooth wood of the tabletop and the earthenware cup that sits beside it. You walk to the table and sit down in the simple wooden chair, feeling the solid, familiar support of the seat and the way the chair creaks slightly under your weight, a small, friendly sound that you have heard thousands of times. Your hands rest on the table, palms down, and you feel the smooth grain of the wood and the slight warmth where the candlelight has been falling. The bell's echo is still there, a faint, low hum at the very edge of your awareness, though it is fading now, dissolving into the quiet of the cottage like the last reverberation of a struck bronze fading into fog. You sit there for a long while, not thinking, not planning, not doing anything at all, simply being still in the warm, dim quiet of your home. The fire shifts and settles in the hearth. The candle flame wavers slightly and then steadies. The fog presses softly against the small windows, and the whole world seems to have slowed to a pace that matches your own breathing, a deep, peaceful rhythm that has no beginning and no end. The morning's work is done, the bell has been rung, the hour has been struck, and now there is nothing to do but rest, letting the quiet of the cottage and the warmth of the fire and the fading memory of the great bronze voice carry you gently into a stillness that is its own kind of song. The bell's echo fades further, becoming less a sound and more a feeling, a soft, low vibration that settles somewhere deep in your chest and then slowly, gently dissolves into silence. You close your eyes, and the darkness behind your lids is warm and red gold from the candlelight, and the quiet of the cottage wraps around you like a second blanket, soft and heavy and full of peace. The fog continues its slow, patient work outside, wrapping the village and the church and the tower and the green in its grey, moist veil, and the great bell hangs silent in its chamber high above, waiting for the next hour, the next morning, the next pair of hands to climb the spiral stair and wake its bronze voice once more. But for now you rest, and the world rests with you, and everything is as it should be.